Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. Shikamaru sighed and looked up at the clouds floating overhead in the forget-me-not blue sky. He would have infinitely preferred to be lying down on the grassy hill behind the training grounds than what he was assigned to do. He sighed again, spit out his cigarette, and ground it underfoot. Troublesome, he muttered. He had been sent to collect Konoha's #1 most surprising knuckle-headed ninja, the one and, thankfully, only Naruto Uzumaki. Lady Tsunade had ordered him to fetch Naruto because she needed him immediately. She hadn't told him why she needed Naruto, just to get him, and when he had complained, she had threatened to beat him until he couldn't stand and then force him to volunteer at the Ninja Academy. He shuddered. Now that sounded troublesome. He started off again in the direction of Naruto's house. When I get there, he thought, I am going to make him sorry. He was supposed to come in 2 hours ago. He would have taken out his annoyance on Lady Tsunade, but, well, she was the Hokage, and the big-breasted woman was extremely scary when she wanted to be. Shikamaru slouched onwards. The houses slowly stopped appearing in neatly manicured lawns, and neat buildings faded into shabby apartments and untamed plants. Then the buildings disappeared altogether and the plants grew wilder and bigger. And then, he was at the edge of the forest, but not just any forest, the forest of death. Why had Naruto decided to build a house in the forest of death again? So that no one would interrupt his training. He jerked out of his thoughts when his foot struck a rock and looked upwards. There it was. Naruto's tower? That was the closest thing to call it he could think of. Constructed out of wooden planks in a tall cylindrical structure with a glass roof and a multitude of windows, a front garden, and a sheltered pathway leading off the main structure to another, smaller one. The wooden slats of the tower were stained bright, eye-smarting, neon orange. Squinting his eyes at the painfully bright color, Shikamaru ambled up the path, only to hit something hard 2 feet from the door. Holding his now sore nose, he felt with his hands out in front of him, and then performed a series of hand seals. When he was done, he whistled. The house was encased in a protective shield of chakra. He couldn't get in. Really, Naruto? He asked, exasperated. He was seriously tempted to just blow off this entire errand and go smoke and watch clouds, but, once again, the looming threat of Tsunade existed. So, with the renewed vigor of someone who is incredibly lazy and is trying to save himself from future pain and work, he quickly did more hand seals, forcing out a pulse of chakra into the surroundings, a trick Naruto had taught him himself. Then, his eyes flashed open. There was an opening in the tower, and it was right in front of him. A small door had been removed from the chakra shield and the actual front door. It looked like a dog door, but bigger, and, suddenly, Shikamaru was grateful for all of the flexibility training that Ino had forced him to do. It had been troublesome, but he had figured that it was better than having her nag him. At this point, he might be the most flexible guy in Konoha. Groaning, he got down on his hands and knees and inched forward, tucking his shoulders in and wriggling forward. 1 minute and 17 seconds later, he was inside. There were hammers and nails, like a flap was going to be added over the gaping hole, but he hadn't gotten around to it. Naruto, you idiot, what was the point of putting up a chakra shield if you left an opening for people to come in? He looked around the room. White walls, orange accents, and black and orange furniture. No one but Naruto could have designed it. Naruto! Shikamaru yelled. There was no response. He slouched further into the room. It looked like it split off into 2 directions. He gazed lazily at the floor. One of the paths had more scuffs and wear on the wooden floor, signaling that it had been treaded on more times before. It was his best bet. With a shrug, he rounded the corner and ran smack into something warm, wet, and soft. With a grunt, he fell backwards and landed hard on the floor, ninja skills not coming in handy, and his head hit the floor. Whatever had run into him let out a squeal and fell on top of him. OWW, he groaned, blinking furiously. What had happened? He could guess. Naruto must have fallen on top of him, the idiot. He opened his eyes to glare at the boy, and then froze. The image he was seeing was definitely not right. Long sunny golden blonde hair draped over her shoulders, water gleamed on smooth tanned skin, quite a lot of it. Plump pink lips were parted in an exclamation, and impossibly, brilliantly, sky blue eyes were widened, in horror? And fear? There were also 3 fine whisker-like scar marks adorning either cheek. His eyes drifted lower, and his brain stopped functioning momentarily. Her bright orange towel had begun to slip, revealing the top of quite large and perky assets. The girl pushed herself off of him, sputtering, and his brain managed to reboot itself. Only something completely mind-boggling could have stopped Inara's train of thought, their intellectual processing, what they were known for, but this did. He stared at the girl. Who was she? As far as he knew, Naruto didn't have a girlfriend, or any relatives that would fit her description at all. There was also the fact that the girl looked like Naruto, too much like Naruto to be a coincidence, even with the same scars. There were only 3 options that came to mind. 1. This was someone in a henge, either Naruto or someone else. It might have been Naruto, playing a prank on him. Possible. 2. He was stuck in a particularly odd and high-level genjutsu. Also possible, and, in fact, the most probable. Or choice 3, what he saw in front of him was real. That was the least probable choice. Option 2 was easy to check. He brought his hands together and said forcefully, "Kai." Nothing happened. He tried it again with the same lack of result. Now the girl, although still afraid looking, had confusion written on her features. "Shikamaru, are you okay?" she asked. Okay, she knew his name, and option 2 was officially not applicable. The long, slim, shapely, tan legs that were exposed from lack of towel covering them were making it hard to concentrate, but he tried. "Naruto?" he asked. The girl forced a nervous smile onto her face. "Yeah? What's your favorite food? Name you call the Hokage, the names of your first teammates, and my favorite thing to do." The girl claiming to be Naruto blinked, and then answered swiftly, "Ramen, Ba-chan, Sasuke Teme and Sakura, and watching clouds, respectively." Shikamaru swore under his breath. That ruled out it being another person, not that he thought that was likely in the first place. Only 2 choices were left. It was either Naruto in a henge, or just plain Naruto. Then, he realized something. He had, a few years previously, noticed that there always was a constant feeling of chakra around Naruto. Something vaguely prickly feeling that he had always assumed was the Kyuubi, and now it was gone. All of this information was leading towards a conclusion that he didn't like at all, and the next thing the girl before him did cemented his suspicions. She threw herself forward so that she was kneeling before him. "Please don't tell anyone, Shikamaru. I'll give you all of my ramen. Just don't tell. The situation must be serious," he thought. No, she is offering her ramen. "Oh, Kami. This means that Naruto's a girl?" Naruto, if that was her name, peeked up at him from under startlingly long dark lashes. "Shikamaru? Are you okay?" He jerked himself out of his head and focused on the problem before him. Obviously, he had stumbled onto something. He placed his hand on his forehead, trying to calm the headache he knew was in his future. "Naruto, please tell me that I'm hallucinating and that you're not a female," he said, irritated. She grinned nervously and scratched her head. Would you believe me if I did?" "Unfortunately, no." "Oh." Naruto's face fell, and she bit her lip. The scene was, now that the towel was in danger of slipping off any second, quite erotic, and pretty disturbing, knowing that the beautiful almost naked girl, no, woman, in front of him was Naruto. Fighting against the temptation that was his hormones, Shikamaru looked up at the ceiling and said, "We need to talk, I suppose. But it might be better if you got some clothes on." Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Naruto's face turn pink and her eyes widen. Then she squeaked, cursed, and disappeared in a blur of gold and orange. Lazily, he heaved himself up off of the floor, slouched to the living room, and collapsed onto the orange and black sofa, and lit a cigarette. He exhaled, and then, eyes drooping, cursed, to Cha. How troublesome. Shikamaru opened his eyes when he felt a small amount of killer intent in his cigarette being plucked from his lips, and looked straight into the face of a pissed-off and very male Naruto. This was the Naruto he knew, short blonde hair, masculine features, blindingly orange clothes. "Don't smoke, especially not in my house. Don't you know that these things can kill you?" Naruto said, incinerating the cigarette in a ball of scarlet flame conjured in his hand. Shikamaru's eyebrows raised minutely. He hadn't known Naruto could do that. "Naruto," he said slowly, looking up at the man, woman, he didn't know quite what to label Naruto at this point. "Is it really the smartest thing to do to steal the cigarette of, and yell at, the person who knows your secret?" Naruto looked shocked, and then the shock faded away into panic. Oh, crap, I'm sorry Shikamaru, I wasn't thinking. Shikamaru sighed again. Figures, he thought, he forgot about that, and instead tried to save him from smoking himself to death. She really was an idiot, but at least an idiot with a good heart. Okay, now it was just getting annoying. He needed to figure out what Naruto was. Could you please drop the henge? He asked. It was getting unnerving, and, quite frankly, female Naruto was easier on the eyes. With a faint poof and a cloud of white smoke, Naruto turned back into a girl, curves still evident through the baggy jumpsuit. They sat in silence for a little, Naruto fidgeting in the chair across from Shikamaru, and Shikamaru staring at Naruto. Finally, Naruto burst out, "What are you going to do? Are you going to tell anyone?" She looked desperate. Shikamaru reached down to grab another cigarette, but stilled his hand. He was pretty sure that Naruto would just burn this one up, too, and that was troublesome. He leaned forward and put his fingers together. "Naruto, why don't you tell me what this is all about?" Naruto looked at him, and then suddenly all of the tension went out of her shoulders and she slumped forward. "It's all Q-chan's fault," she muttered. Shikamaru nodded. He understood she was talking about the Kyuubi, but how exactly was it? Wait, Q-chan? As far as he knew, chan was a prefix that denoted that you were friendly with the person, and that that person was a female, that is, unless he was losing his mind and this was simply a hallucination, which seemed to be getting more probable by the moment. Q-chan? He didn't realize he said it until the words were past his lips. Naruto nodded. "Yeah, Q-chan. She wanted me to call her Q-heim, but I am not doing that. You know that the Kyuubi is sealed in me, but you might not know that Kyuubi is a woman. Well, a female at least. I'm not entirely sure what female demons are called." Her voice trailed off. "Naruto, get back on topic." "Oh, right. I was a boy, but," Naruto said, but then stopped at the expression on the Nara's face. It was a once-a-year occurrence. Instead of there being indifference, annoyance, irritation, sleepiness, laziness, or just general lack of emotion, Shikamaru looked slightly startled. In fact, Shikamaru was. He stared at Naruto. What does he mean he was a boy? The whole thing was just getting weirder and weirder with each passing moment, but he waved for Naruto to continue. "Right, well, as I was saying, I was a boy, but things kind of changed when I hit puberty. You see, like I said, I was a boy. That part is true, but Q-chan is a female, and a little after I turned 13, when I hit puberty, I kind of merged on a deeper level with Q-chan. I could talk to her in my mindscape at will, and use her power, and, in return, she can experience everything I do. She didn't tell me that I would turn into a girl overnight, though," she finished on a grumpy note. Shikamaru whistled lowly. He had heard of puberty being an awkward and hard time for kids, but not like this. Imagine changing overnight. Now that could be hard to deal with. He winced at the idea of your manhood disappearing and growing breasts instead. It was a man's worst nightmare. But, as disturbing and weird as this was, it didn't explain some things. "I can understand how." He stopped and clapped Naruto on the shoulder. "I'm sorry for what you went through, man." Apologizing just seemed like the right thing to do. Naruto snorted, "Thanks. You have no idea how it feels to wake up as a girl." No, Shikamaru didn't know, and he didn't want to imagine it. But they were getting off track, and there were still questions that needed to be answered. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Or did you?" he asked. Naruto ran a hand through her now long hair. When I woke up and found out that I was a girl, I had a long talk with Q-chan. We thought it would be best not to tell anyone what had happened. The villagers, and some of the other ninja, they don't like me, because of the Kyuubi." Shikamaru snorted inwardly. That was an understatement. A large percentage of the population, ignorant as they were, hated him, or rather, her, and all because they thought that Naruto was the Kyuubi. Naruto puffed out her cheeks, which, on Naruto as a guy had just looked ridiculous, but now as a girl looked adorable. Shikamaru pushed that unwelcome fact into a dark corner of his mind and focused on what Naruto was saying. Those people might get freaked out and they knew that I was closer to Q-chan, and they might think that the seal was breaking. Shikamaru narrowed his eyes. Naruto was leaving something out. And, he prodded, and Q-chan thought that I would be safer if I continued life as a boy. If they knew I was a girl, they might try to. Naruto couldn't get the last word out, but Shikamaru understood, and what was worse, was the fact that the men of the village might actually have tried. That's not the only reason, though. Life as a kunoichi is more dangerous, and, he paused and then said in a rush, I thought that the council might try and force me into an arranged marriage to cement a peace treaty. She continued before Shikamaru could say anything. Think about it. If you wanted to join alliances with another village, what better way to do that than giving them a human weapon? If a village has a jinchuriki, it's like added protection and a warning to other villages. And females are much more likely to be forced to do that. Shikamaru grimaced. Naruto was right. No matter how distasteful, it was actually something that the village might do. By some, Naruto wasn't even considered human, but Shikamaru could definitely see some of the more unpleasant council members thinking of Naruto as a bargaining chip. But what amazed him the most was that Naruto had thought this all through. Maybe he was dreaming. He could hope at least. Almost as if Naruto knew what he was thinking, he said, I'll put a rumor of the village to rest, Shikamaru. I'm not that stupid, at least, I'm definitely smarter than Kiba. Shikamaru shrugged. That wasn't really saying much. Most of his questions had been cleared up, and he didn't like the answers. They were making his overdeveloped brain hurt. He knew he shouldn't have shown up for work today. Staying home and playing shogi sounded so much less troublesome. There was one little thing that he was curious about. Are you good, friends with the Kyuubi? Naruto did something in between a nod and shaking her head, like a head bobble. Well, I guess you could say that. We don't hate each other anymore. I mean, I don't blame her for being sealed in me, and she doesn't hate me for being her prison. I was kind of pissed at her for a while for not telling me that I would turn into a freaking chick, but I'm okay with that now. She says she could have been sealed into a worse human, though not necessarily more retarded. It's a love-hate relationship. If you want to know the truth, she's a bit of a bitch, she broke off, her face turning a lovely shade of pink, and her eyes became unfocused. Shikamaru leaned forward, trying to figure out what was happening. He supposed she was talking to the Kyuubi. Then, Naruto let out a shriek and clamped her hands over her eyes. Oh, don't show me that. My brain. It's burning my brain. Shikamaru's sweat dropped. He had the idea that nothing life-threatening was happening, but something potentially disturbing was. A few seconds later, Naruto slowly uncovered her eyes, cheeks still pink. Sorry, she murmured, coughing slightly. What happened? Shikamaru asked, although not entirely sure that he wanted to know. Naruto hesitated, and then answered, Q-chan is a complete pervert. Think Kakashi-sensei and Ero Sennin wrapped into one and then to the 8th power. Shikamaru's eye twitched. He had a collection of Icha at home, but he wasn't obsessed with it and had trouble dealing with Kakashi's perversions sometimes. The Great Toad Sage was a completely different story, super pervert and a self-proclaimed one at that. She likes you, Naruto added, almost as if in explanation, and Shikamaru suddenly had an idea of what the Kyuubi had shown Naruto. He felt his cheeks heating up and coughed into his hand. They drifted off into extremely uncomfortable silence, and Shikamaru went over what he had learned in his head. Naruto had been a boy, and now was completely a girl, was very close to the Kyuubi, and was hiding her true identity for very reasonable reasons. He, on the other hand, had discovered her secret, and now had to decide what to do about it. This whole thing, he thought, annoyed and still a little flustered, was a complete mess. Only Naruto could have made something like this, and now he was involved. He didn't suppose he could just pretend this never happened? He threw that idea away. That was wishful thinking, and it would come back to bite him in the end. Are you going to tell? Naruto asked suddenly, looking at him with big, liquid, sky-blue eyes. Shikamaru took a breath, let it out, and then slouched back into the couch. No, I won't tell anyone. It would be too much work. The next second, Naruto launched herself forward, and wrapped her arms around his neck. Really? Thank you. I swear, I will treat you to ramen for this. Thank you. Even though Naruto was almost choking him, he couldn't stop the jolt of pleasure that flashed through him. Naruto was hugging him tightly, and was obviously not wearing a bra. Soft, warm mounds pressed against him, and he pushed Naruto off hurriedly. Even if Naruto was now a woman, she had no idea the effect she was creating, and he didn't feel like enlightening her. She stopped hugging him, but still beamed at him. Huge grin spread across her face. He looked away from her face and glanced at the clock on the wall. It had been an hour since the Hokage had sent him to fetch Naruto. He was so dead. With a groan, he stood up. We should get going, I suppose. Lady Tsunade is going to murder me, and I plan on using you as a shield, Shikamaru said flatly. Usually he was all for chivalry, but in this case, he could forget about it. Naruto pumped her fist in the air, all melancholy about him finding out her secret gone. She was about to stroll out the door, but Shikamaru stopped her. Shouldn't you henge yourself into your guy form? Right. With another poof, Naruto stood in front of him as a guy, again. He had to say, he really was starting to prefer Naruto's true form. As they passed out the door, Shikamaru said, you should probably fix the doggy door. Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to design a seal to put on the flap to allow only foxes to pass. Shikamaru shook his head. Figures. Naruto bounced down the path. A ball of inexhaustible energy, let's go. Yeah, Shikamaru lazily followed. He had a feeling that life was going to get a whole lot more difficult. His hand strayed to the pouch with his cigarettes and he held it to his lips. He also had a feeling that he was going to need a lot more cigarettes to get through what was going to happen. He lit it and took a drag, inhaling deeply. Hey, put that thing down. Yes, life was getting more troublesome already. 20 minutes later, they stood outside the door to the Hokage's office. Shikamaru, being the intelligent and brilliant man he was, hung back and let Naruto go ahead for safety reasons. Without even knocking, Naruto pushed open the double doors energetically and yelled loudly, Oi, Ba-chan. I'm here. What do you want? There was a smacking sound, and Lady Tsunade growled, Don't call me that, brat. Figuring it was safe to enter the office, Shikamaru unhurriedly went in. A large vein was pulsing in Lady Tsunade's forehead, and Naruto cowered before her, holding her head. He wouldn't expect anything else. He collapsed into a chair, out of the reach of the Hokage's fists. Lady Tsunade muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, ungrateful brat, and gulped down some sake from the ever-present supply on her desk. It amazed him. Shikamaru knew he had a pretty high tolerance for alcohol, but she must have been immune with the amount she downed. How did she function? And what was she like sober? The Hokage slammed her container of sake down on the desk and then leveled an impressive glare at the Nara. What the hell took you so long? I sent you to get him 2 hours ago. She stood up from her desk, large breasts bouncing dangerously. Shikamaru would have pointed out that it hadn't been 2 hours, if he had a death wish. Instead, he started analyzing the room for possible exits. What happened next surprised him slightly. Wait, it wasn't Shikamaru's fault. I made him wait while I ate my ramen. Naruto said, stepping in between the pissed off slug princess and the lazy genius. Naruto had saved him? More than that, Naruto had lied to save him from getting his ass beat. Although, Naruto couldn't exactly tell Lady Tsunade that he was really a she and everything else that had happened. Well, maybe knowing Naruto's secret wouldn't be quite that troublesome. No, that was still just wishful thinking. Every single one of his better-than-average brain cells told him that this was going to be a completely whacked out, not in a good way, situation. The Hokage stopped, halfway to Shikamaru, fist raised. Ramen? It took that whole time because you were eating ramen? Naruto nodded frantically, and then saw the dangerous look in her eyes, but didn't dodge fast enough. She slugged Naruto on the head again, brat. Eat your ramen on your own time. She stomped back to her desk and sat down with a huff, leaving Shikamaru gazing at her lazily and Naruto nursing, not 1, but 2 lumps on her head. Now, the Hokage said, I called you here, Naruto, because I have a problem. Our village has been contracted to do a mission. By the Yugakure. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow. As far as he knew, the Yugakure wasn't a ninja village. That wasn't the odd part. The odd part was the Yugakure hiring them. They had barely had any contact with the Hidden Leaf village. Tsunade continued, usually, this wouldn't be a problem, but it's more complicated. As you two know, or you at least know, Nara, the Yugakure doesn't have ninja. Or, at least, they didn't. They do now. They're forming new ninja clans, building shinobi schools, and instituting new everything, basically. They are also rising in power. Do you know what this means? We have a chance to ally ourselves with them. Naruto, who had been fighting to keep still, asked, well, that's cool. What's the problem, Ba-chan? Tsunade twitched, but managed not to give Naruto a third bruise. The problem, brat, is that the new cage, has a problem. He has information that there will be an assassination attempt on his daughter, and he doesn't know who to trust in his own country. He does, however, trust me, and by extension, he trusts the ninja I trust. Now, he believes that his daughter will be assassinated on her birthday, and he needs 2 ninja to come and protect her. They need to be able to blend in, to pretend to be friends of his daughter. She's around your age, and that's the problem. Shikamaru's brain was processing information. The Yugakure becoming a shinobi village was a major event, and he could see why Lady Tsunade would want to make a treaty with them. Then there was the assassination attempt. That wasn't too unusual either, and there were plenty of ninjas that were their age. What exactly was the problem? The Hokage answered that question. Here's the problem. Ino is pregnant, which you know, and I couldn't put her on the mission, and Choji wants to be there when the baby is born. Lee just stands out too much. Neji and Tenten are on missions, and Sakura, while I know she is my apprentice, she isn't cut out for field work, and then there's the Uchiha. He doesn't work well with anyone but Naruto. Size, well, Sai is Sai. Also, at least one of the ninja I send needs to be a girl. It wouldn't be right if they were both male. People might get suspicious. Okay, things were getting a little more complicated, but still, he could see at least one solution to the problem. Can't you send in another ninja in a henge to look right? He drawled. No, that's one of the problems. The Yugakure has one very talented person especially, who created a new seal. They inscribed it in the entrance to the city, and whoever passes by immediately is revealed as who they are. Their henge gets dispelled. Does that mean we'd see what you really look like, Ba-chan? Naruto piped up. She dodged as an empty sake bottle sped past her head. Shikamaru now could see the problem. If they needed ninjas to set off immediately, and they didn't have any available, then diplomacy between 2 villages could be on the line. As lazy as he was, he could see how the situation could become troublesome, even to him. But what had she asked? Well, ordered him to fetch Naruto. She thought that Naruto was a boy, or did she? Maybe she knew and was calling Naruto out on it. There was also another option, one to do with Naruto's tenant. So why do you want me? Naruto asked, pointing to herself with a clueless expression. Tsunade sighed, and the anger drained away from her face. Naruto? The seal will strip away henges, regular henges, but I thought that perhaps you, with the Kyuubi, could find a way to bypass it. Shikamaru watched Naruto's face as the Hokage made her request. A flicker of something else, something darker, flashed across Naruto's face, and it didn't belong. But it quickly disappeared and an idiotically grinning Naruto reappeared. It had happened so quickly that Shikamaru doubted whether Tsunade had even seen it. Sure, of course I can, Ba-chan. I'll be back here tomorrow, and you'll see, okay? Believe it. She gave the Hokage a big thumbs up. The tension seemed to seep out of Tsunade. Really? I actually believe you, brat. Don't disappoint me, okay? Now, you're dismissed. Go get some ramen, she said roughly, but definitely fondly, and tossed a small pouch of money to Naruto and then pouring herself another cup of sake. Got it. Naruto waved an exuberant goodbye and burst out of the office. Shikamaru followed at a more leisurely pace. He couldn't imagine where Naruto got all of his, no, her, energy. It made him tired just watching. They walked down the hallway. Well, Shikamaru walked. Naruto was jumping around like a monkey who had been dosed with espresso. The sharp clack of heels on stone caught the Nara's attention. A pink-haired woman, with bright green eyes and a rather large forehead, strutted down the hall, a stack of files clutched close to her chest. Sakura-chan, Naruto exclaimed, lunging forward to hug her and smiling idiotically. Sakura sidestepped easily, and Naruto went barreling into the wall. Sakura-chan, how about a date? I'll take you anywhere you want. Shikamaru paused. That was another thing to think about. Naruto's insistent pursuit of Sakura. He now knew that Naruto was a girl, a female, a woman, and Sakura was also a girl, not that he had anything against it, them both being girls. So Naruto liked Sakura, but Sakura didn't know that Naruto was a girl. How was it supposed to work? Personally, he couldn't see the attraction to Sakura. She was loud, although Naruto was too. She was also annoying, brash, violent, selfish, plain, and had the almost impossible ability to be smart at book smarts and absolutely retarded in practical use. Sakura scowled at the grinning Naruto, and she snapped, "Baka. Leave me alone, and stop asking me. I'm not going to go on a date with you." Naruto pouted. "Aw, Sakura-chan, You don't have to be so mean, he whined. She glared at him sharply. I have work to do, real work, so leave me alone, and let me get it done. Go bother someone else. She directed a scathing glance at Shikamaru, who was leaning up against the wall, and then stomped off. Yup, he just couldn't figure out what Naruto saw in her. She was even more troublesome than Ino. At least Ino had calmed down with all of the fangirl stuff and had already settled down with Choji. Shikamaru also knew a few other things about Sakura from Ino. Apparently, when Ino had used her family jutsu to go into Sakura's head, she had learned that the other girl had a split personality. It figured. You okay, Naruto? He asked quietly. Naruto just smiled and nodded. Absolutely. Don't worry. I'll get her to go on a date with me no matter what. I never give up, she said, picking herself up off of the floor and continuing her way out of the tower. Shikamaru slouched at her side. Hey, Naruto, do you really love Sakura? I mean, I know you're really a. He let the words fall silent, careful in case an Anbu member had been listening. Naruto shook her head. No. I don't love her like that. It's just to keep up my image. When I was younger, I saw some kids picking on her, and I kind of felt a connection. I wanted to be her friend. That's all I wanted for a while, but after a few years, I realized that she wasn't the person I thought she was. She's kind of bossy and mean, you know? I'd still like to be her friend, though. I haven't given up on that. She lapsed into silence. Still? Naruto still hadn't given up on Sakura being anything other than a bossy, annoying woman? Shikamaru had to give her credit for her tenacity, or stupidity. It could go either way. It'd make him feel better, for some unknown reason, to know that Naruto didn't have those sorts of feelings for Sakura. The two together had never seemed quite right to him, mainly because, although they could both be loud and annoying, Naruto cared deeply and was nice, and Sakura wasn't so much. Shikamaru knew she wasn't that bad, but, personally, he just didn't care for her. Naruto, on the other hand, was a different story. He liked Naruto, now even more that he knew he was actually a she, and a hachi at that. Sure, Naruto was troublesome, and irritated him sometimes, okay, a lot of the time, but she was still just plain good. Naruto jerked him out of the rather flattering, if a little odd, thoughts that Shikamaru was having. Hey, Shikamaru? Yeah, what? Do you want to go get some ramen? She held up the bag with the money the Hokage had given her and shook it. Shikamaru rocked back and forth on his heels for a moment, and then shrugged. Sure, that didn't sound too bad. Awesome, let's go, Naruto yelled, punching the air and starting off in the direction of the Ichiraku ramen bar. As what was beginning to become a habit, Shikamaru lazily trudged after her, once again lighting a cigarette and inhaling deeply. The next thing he knew, the cigarette had been plucked from his lips, again, and Naruto was scowling at him. What did I tell you? Don't smoke. It's bad for you and it ruins your taste buds. Do you know what that means? It means that you won't be able to taste the ramen. I don't even want to think about that. It's horrible. Now, come on. She proceeded to drag an only faintly dismayed and irked Shikamaru after her. He couldn't argue with her logic, even if it was skewed and he didn't appreciate it. He had the feeling that, in the near future, his precious cigarettes were going to be manhandled by a certain blonde. As he was dragged along, something suddenly became clear. The expression that had flashed across Naruto's face when the Hokage had mentioned the Kyuubi, it had been, not anger or sadness, but a sort of tired and emotionless acceptance. It had looked empty, and that was an expression that didn't belong on Naruto's face. The idea intrigued and scared him. He was finding out that Naruto wasn't quite what he had thought, and he still had a lot to learn, but for now Naruto's warm hand was latched onto his, holding him firmly so that he couldn't escape, and well, even in the whole situation was bothersome. So far, he didn't really mind. Things could have been more troublesome. Shikamaru, with bored eyes, took in the appearance of everyone else in the Hokage's office. It was packed, but he knew why there were so many people. They were all there to test out Naruto's jutsu, to make sure it was foolproof. Kiba Inuzuka was there, probably because of his enhanced eyes, hearing, and sense of smell, and he kept glancing sideways at a nervously fiddling Hinata Hyuga. She was there because of her Byakugan, and the Uchiha was there because of his Sharingan. Kakashi was probably there because he was Naruto's old sensei, although that didn't really make sense. He was just leaning against the wall, a volume of Icha Icha in his hand, giggling perversely at random intervals. Pervert. There wasn't really a reason why Sakura was there that he could figure out. It must have been because she was Lady Tsunade's apprentice. He couldn't even figure out why he was there. It couldn't be good. How troublesome. Now that he thought about it, why had the Hokage asked Naruto about her henge if Hinata was in the village? As far as he knew, she was a female and didn't appear to be on a mission. Oh, well. He'd ask later, maybe after Naruto came, if she ever did. She was late, and the Hokage had already gone through 2 bottles of sake, which, as far as he could tell, were not improving her mood. When is Naruto going to get here? Kiba asked loudly and impatiently, running his fingers through Akamaru's fur. Hinata, with a faint blush on her face, said quietly, I'm sure that he has a good reason for being late, Kiba. Shikamaru almost smiled. After so many years, Hinata had, mostly, gotten over Naruto, and now they were actually friends, and, if he wasn't mistaken, which, taking into account his IQ, he doubted, Kiba was going to ask her out shortly. Maybe she'd be a good influence on the Inuzuka. He was almost as loud as Naruto, and twice as brash. Almost as if Naruto knew they were talking about her, the doors flew open, and Naruto walked in, but it wasn't the Naruto they knew. All eyes were on her. Her long golden hair was tied up in high pigtails, like in her Wai no Jutsu, but she looked different. She had no whisker marks, and she was more delicate looking, with wide blue eyes, slender body, and, wow. She wore a pale, burnt orange top, with a strap tied around her neck, that outlined her breasts, and was cut off right under her bust, showing a tanned, toned stomach. A thought nagged at him. Her seal wasn't in sight, but he ignored it for the moment, going back to his study of Naruto. A pair of baggy dark brown pants hung seductively low on her hips. Shikamaru swallowed hard. She looked almost as good as she had wet, half naked, with her towel falling off. He wasn't the only one stunned. The room was silent, except for a faint thump when Kakashi dropped his Icha Icha book in surprise. Naruto grinned at their expressions, but addressed herself to the Hokage. Well, what do you think, Ba-chan? Lady Tsunade shook her head. Brat, you just better be glad that that pervert Jiraiya isn't here. You'd be the inspiration for his newest book. She turned to the other occupants of the room and nodded, signaling for them to start their inspection. Kiba stepped forward with Akamaru, and looked at Naruto closely, sniffing the air. His face was so red that Shikamaru was surprised he hadn't had a nosebleed yet. After a thorough inspection, he stepped back, and reported to the Hokage. I can't find anything out of the ordinary, besides something faintly chemical, he said, shrugging. That's makeup, Naruto offered. Kiba stared at her but didn't say anything. Hinata went next, after frowning at Kiba for a moment, most likely because he was ogling Naruto. Shikamaru couldn't help but agree with her. There was no reason for him to stare at Naruto quite so much. She activated her Byakugan and the veins stood out harshly around her eyes. After a few moments, she deactivated it and shook her head slowly. I can't see anything out of the ordinary. Naruto, it looks like you have the chakra pathways of a civilian. Naruto beamed at her and hugged her. No, Hinata-chan. It's not Naruto anymore. It's Naruto-chan. The image of the 2 beautiful and big-breasted women hugging, bodies pressed together was too much. Plus, Kiba looked like he was drooling. Okay, Uchiha, Shikamaru interrupted. Let's see if your Sharingan can see anything. Naruto pulled away from a red-faced and stuttering Hinata and stood in front of Sasuke. Sasuke stared down at Naruto, and immediately his eyes turned red, spinning tomos in their depths. Minutes went by, and no one moved or said a word, and then, Sasuke's eyes returned to their normal dark gray hue. He grunted, turning away. Shikamaru took that as meaning that he hadn't found anything, and so did Naruto. She pumped her fist in the air. I knew it. You couldn't find anything wrong, could you? I look like a perfect hot chick. Shikamaru watched as the Uchiha's face twitched, and he said, I might not have been able to find anything wrong, but that doesn't mean that you could act like a girl, or even look like a beautiful one. It was a lame comeback, and Shikamaru knew the Uchiha knew it, but it riled up Naruto. She glared at Sasuke. What was that, Teme? I'm sorry, I don't speak bastardese. I could have sworn you said something. I said, you may look like a female, sort of, but I doubt you could act like one. You couldn't seduce Kiba, and he's an idiot, Dobi. Kiba growled at this, but Sasuke ignored him. Shikamaru suddenly had the urge to team up with Kiba and kick the Uchiha's ass. He frowned, wondering where that emotion came from. Naruto puffed out her cheeks and poked Sasuke in the chest. "Teme, I'll show you." If there was one thing that Naruto couldn't resist or back down from, it was a challenge. Shikamaru leaned back into the chair and pulled out a cigarette, figuring that Naruto was too busy to notice he was smoking. Sasuke raised an eyebrow at Naruto's outburst and asked emotionlessly, but somehow still managing to sound like a bastard, "Oh, and how are you going to do that?" A foxy smile, which sent chills up Shikamaru's spine, formed on Naruto's face. "Oh, just watch." She turned away from him and in the direction of Kakashi. Then, she started. She walked towards him slowly, hips swaying sensually with each step. Kakashi didn't move, but Shikamaru could tell that he was paying attention. He hadn't flipped a page of his Icha for several minutes, and his eyes, or rather, eye wasn't moving down the sentences. "Kakashi-sensei," Naruto practically purred, standing in front of him, "what do you think? How'd I look?" Kakashi glanced up from his book, only to be met with a very good view of Naruto's chest. "You look fine, Naruto," he answered. Naruto pouted and moved closer. "Just fine? Not beautiful?" she asked, moving around him. "Kakashi-sensei, can I ask you a favor?" Shikamaru stared. How did she manage to make something so innocent sound so dirty? "Yes, Naruto?" Shikamaru respected Kakashi's resolve. He actually managed to keep his voice steady. Naruto ran her fingers lightly along his arm and shoulders. "When I get back from my mission, since you're still so much stronger than me, could you give me a lesson?" She moved still closer, positioned her lips next to his ear, and whispered, "A private lesson?" "Kakashi?" She drew out his name in a sultry way, and ran her fingers through his gravity-defying silver hair. Kakashi's face, or what wasn't covered by his face mask and headband, was tinged pink, and he seemed to be leaning into Naruto's touch. A burning pain between Shikamaru's fingers alerted him that this cigarette had burned down. Maybe he had walked into a different dimension, because where he was standing, it looked like Naruto was seducing Kakashi. It was like watching one of the Icha books come to life. What the hell was Naruto thinking? Although, not that he minded seeing this. It was really erotic, although, he would have preferred that he was in Kakashi's place. He froze. He did not just think that. There was no way. While he was having his internal battle, Naruto, with a smile, patted Kakashi on the head and stepped in front of a speechless Sasuke. "Take that, Teme. I can so act like a girl and seduce." Shikamaru's sweat dropped. Oh, right. He had forgotten about the challenge while Naruto had been doing her little act. Well, to be fair, it had been very distracting. Where had Naruto learned to act like that? The great Toad Sage had probably perverted her mind when they had gone on the training trip. Sasuke averted his eyes, face pink, and said, "HN." But his voice cracked, sending Naruto into gales of laughter, and making the Uchiha glare. In the corner, Kiba's nose was bleeding freely, and Hinata's face was the color of a ripe tomato. The Hokage was just staring at Naruto, one hand pouring sake, but it was missing the cup and dripping off the desk into a puddle on the floor. Sakura, who had been silent the whole time, exploded. "Naruto baka, you're embarrassing Sasuke. Take off the henge, now." Sakura's face was the color of her hair. Personally, Shikamaru had the idea that Sakura had enjoyed the little scene, but he wasn't about to say that aloud. He knew, from experience, that she could hit hard when she wanted to. "Ah, what's wrong, Sakura-chan? Jealous 'cause I'm hotter than you?" Naruto teased. Sakura's mouth formed a perfect O of horror and her eyes bugged out. Shikamaru couldn't help but snort in laughter. The look on her face. The rest of the occupants of the room, with the exception of Kakashi, who still seemed to be stupefied, burst into laughter. Now, Sakura looked murderous. She cracked her knuckles threateningly, "You're going down." But before she could lunge forward at Naruto, Lady Tsunade grabbed her by the back of her dress. "Sakura, try and act like an adult." "But, Tsunade." "Naruto," Sakura started, but the Hokage interrupted. "Naruto's an idiot." "Hey," said Idiot yelled, but was ignored. She continued, "It does not mean that you need to act like an idiot, too. Got it?" With a glare at Naruto and a pout, Sakura nodded stiffly. "Good, now," Lady Tsunade said, turning to Naruto, "I don't know how you did it, but since none of us can tell that you're anything but a civilian, you got the mission. Thank Kami. This is a 3-person mission, though. 2 of you will play civilians, and 1 of you will go as the ninja hired to escort them to the Yugakure. We all know that one of the civilians will be Naruto in his henge. Shikamaru flicked his burnt-out cigarette straight into one of the empty sake bottles, effectively catching her attention. Yes, Nara? Why are you having Naruto go on the mission when you have Hinata? Hinata has been requested to do another mission because her skill sets are needed. She goes out tomorrow, and I don't want to piss off the person who contracted it. Now, as I was saying, Naruto will play the girl, and I believe Sasuke should go as the actual ninja, since, if you, Naruto, are acting as a friend of the Kage's daughter, then you would be protected by a first-class ninja, hence Sasuke. Sasuke smirked, pleased, for a moment. And, the other person who I want going on this mission is you, Nara. Shikamaru glared at her lazily. That was not good. Him? Going on a mission with Naruto and the Uchiha? First, he just didn't want to go on missions. They were troublesome, and he spent a portion of his time avoiding going on missions. Second, he'd probably crack and kill Naruto if he had to spend much time in Naruto's company. Naruto was like ice cream. Eat too much and you'll get brain freeze, or in this case, commit homicide. Third, he really didn't like the Uchiha, there was just something about him. Probably something to do with him being a cocky emo bastard. Why me? He asked aloud, although he already knew the answer. Because. The Yugakure, we know some things about. The Yugakure as a ninja village, we do not. With your intelligence you would most likely notice and observe and understand more than anyone else. I need information, and you're the best choice. Plus, you don't really look like a ninja. Now, you are taking this mission. There was no room for argument in her tone. His mind scanned for possible options. There weren't any. You couldn't really refuse a direct order from the Hokage. Fine, he grumbled. Good. Sasuke, Naruto, Shikamaru. All of you report to the front gate at dawn tomorrow. The mission will begin. Take this information I have on the Yugakure, the Kage, and his daughter and have it memorized by tomorrow, Lady Tsunade said. Naruto shot across the room and wrapped her arms around his neck. Awesome. We get to go on a mission together, Shika. Shika? When had he been promoted to Shika instead of Shikamaru? Oh, well, it didn't sound that bad. She was still hugging him, body pleasantly soft and warm against his, and all of the men were glaring at him, while Sakura glared at Naruto. How bothersome. The guys were glaring at him because Naruto, who they thought was a guy, still looked like a hot girl. He wondered how they'd react if they knew that Naruto actually was a hot girl. And Sakura was glaring because Naruto had hit the issue right on the head. Naruto was much hotter than her, and she obviously didn't like it. The Hokage was happily drinking sake, and Hinata was blushing for some unknown reason. He shrugged inwardly. Naruto was still hugging him, babbling about the mission, and the feeling was nice to say the least. He might as well enjoy himself for now, the next day was going to be extremely troublesome. He just knew it. Shikamaru sighed and slouched down the wall until he was sitting on the ground. The sun was just beginning to rise over the trees, illuminating their leaves and tinting the light faintly green. He was in the shadow of the wall, eyes closed and arms crossed over his chest. He was early, but it wasn't by choice. Choji and Ino had come over to his apartment the night before, and, somehow, one of them had managed to sneak off and set his alarm clock for an hour earlier. He seriously suspected Ino had done it when Choji had started cooking, and before she had started bugging him about the details of his mission with Naruto and the Uchiha. He had no idea how she had even found out, although he supposed it was the power of gossip. Never underestimate it. So now, here he was, early. He placed his fingers together and went over the facts of the mission. The objective of the mission? Protect and gather information. They had to protect Katona Shimizu, daughter of the Kage of the Yugakure, Takeshi Shimizu. She was 17, turning 18, a brunette, and female. That was about the extent of the information they had on her. Pitiful, and bothersome. Even if the Yugakure was a minor village that they didn't have much interest in, or contact with, they should know everything they could about them, just in case a situation like they were in now occurred. Now, they were at a disadvantage, and his intelligence couldn't glean strategies from non-existent facts. There was one more thing that he had learned in the folder that the Hokage had given him. He was going to act as Naruto's boyfriend for the duration of the mission. What was he supposed to do? A faint rustling in front of him disturbed his chain of thought, and he opened his eyes, only to stare into a pair of wide, brilliant, sky-blue eyes that were looking curiously at him. When had Naruto arrived? How had she managed to sneak up on him? And when had she gotten so good? She was wearing the same clothes that she had been wearing the day before, and a black and orange bag with a red spiral was slung over her shoulder. The sun was just coming over the wall and highlighting her golden hair. Naruto smiled at him widely. "Morning, Shika. I'm glad you're here before Sasuke." "Good morning, Naruto," Shikamaru said, and then took in what she had actually said. "Why are you glad I'm here before the Uchiha?" "Because, I have something for you, and I don't want Sasuke to see." That was not the response he had been expecting. She had something for him? His mind ranged over the possibilities, from the reasonable to the absurd to the questionably perverse. Aloud, he asked, "What is it?" She dug through one of her pockets for a second and then held out her hand. "This," she said with a flourish. In the middle of her palm was a small, black, studded earring. He picked it up between his index and thumb, and looked at it closely. It was a small half-sphere, shiny and black, and it seemed to have scratched all over its surface. Frowning, he channeled a small amount chakra to his eyes. They weren't scratches, or rather, they were, but they were purposeful. Characters and patterns on a micro-level were scratched, silver lines showing through the black, creating a seal. "What is it?" he asked again, though with a different meaning. Naruto bounced impatiently. "Put it on. Then you'll see," she said. He didn't make a move to do to. "What is it going to do, Naruto?" He wasn't going to put on an earring when he didn't know what it would do, until he was sure that it wouldn't fry his brain, or something equally troublesome. With an annoyed outlet of breath, Naruto snatched the earring from his palm, and settled down onto her knees in front of him. "It's not going to hurt you." "Geez, who do you think you're talking to?" she grumbled. Then, she grabbed his chin softly and tilted his head to the side. He could feel her fingers, slightly calloused, but gentle against his skin, taking out one of his earrings, and putting the one she had given him in. He shivered. Mind over matter, he chanted in his mind. Somehow, he had the idea that the person who came up with that hadn't been a teenaged boy with hormones who had just found out that one of his friends was really a girl. A hot girl. Mind over matter didn't exactly cover the situation. Naruto leaned back and grinned at him. Then, there was a faint, almost unnoticeable buzzing in his ear. Great, maybe the thing really was going to blow his head off. "Isn't it cool, Shika?" Naruto asked, but her lips didn't move at all, and it sounded like she was in his head almost. He jerked his head around. What was happening? He didn't have a clue. "Don't freak out. Geez, have a little faith in your future Hokage. This is just something that I made. Focus on the earring." Once again, the words were spoken in his head as Naruto's lips were clamped firmly shut. Shikamaru did as she said, closing his eyes and focusing on the earring. There it was. There was a minuscule thread of chakra connecting it to Naruto. It didn't even seem to be tangible, but it was there. "See? Cool, isn't it?" Naruto's voice came through again, and the thread vibrated rapidly in his mind's eyes. "Try talking to me yourself. It's pretty easy. Just focus on the frequency. Like this?" he projected his thought. "Yep, just like that." He opened his eyes. This was amazing. They were having a telepathic conversation. How? Was the only question that seemed right to ask. "Well," Naruto said, out loud this time, "I made it. I had gotten back from a mission, and Ba-chan wouldn't give me another one, insisting that I needed to rest, so I was really bored, and I had been watching TV, and I got an idea. What if I could connect two people? I mean really connect them, so I started to experiment. It took a bunch of tries, but I finally got it to work. It works like a radio. The seals on the stud ground and gather the chakra, and transforms the chakra frequency from my stud, into a voice in your head. Cool, huh? It's pretty easy to use after a little bit of practice." Shikamaru stared at her. It was amazing. The small stud had so much potential, if what Naruto was saying was true. And, judging from the fact that he had her voice in his head, it seemed true. As cliché as it sounded, the possibilities were endless. A squad would be able to each other without alerting the enemy from miles away, transmit information, and, well, anything. The amount of chakra used was so small that he doubted that Tsunade would notice it unless he told her what to look for. This kid, no, definitely would, give Konoha a major advantage over the other villages. "Naruto?" This is brilliant, he said finally. Naruto cocked her head to the side cutely and looked at him blankly. Huh? What are you talking about? I was just bored and messing around. She had no idea the impact this invention could have, did she? You really are an idiot, Savon. She looked at him suspiciously. That doesn't sound good. He shrugged and smiled a little. It's not a bad thing. Now, about this earring. He was cut off abruptly by Naruto's hand over his mouth. Not now. Sasuke is coming, she said, taking her hand off his mouth. He glared at her. You could have just told me. She scratched her head nervously and said, grinning, oh, right. Sorry. She straightened up and held out her hand to him. He shook his head and let her haul him up off the ground. It figured. She acted first and thought later, the opposite from him. A few seconds later, Sasuke appeared and eyed them. Only then did Shikamaru realize that Naruto was still holding his hands from pulling him up. Now that was interesting. Why exactly was the Uchiha glaring at him? It was something to think about. Are we ready to go? Sasuke asked coldly, walking towards the gate without waiting for an answer. Oi, Teme, wait up, Naruto hollered after him, swinging her bag. Shikamaru followed them, engrossed in his thoughts. Naruto simply didn't realize what she had created. It was so small, and looked like a regular piece of jewelry, so no enemy ninja would think about removing it when they captured another ninja. They were out of the village before he was out of his thoughts, and the village doors closed after them. Sasuke let out a breath of relief. Let's go, he grunted. What's with you? Shikamaru asked, not caring as so much, wondering why the Uchiha would be relieved to leave the village. Sakura, came the grunted reply. Shikamaru nodded. That made sense, wanting to leave the village before Sakura came and said goodbye, the goodbye consisting of clinging to his arm and squealing, Sasuke, at ear-shattering decibels. Suddenly, a small hand gripped his own, and he looked down to see Naruto smiling at him. Why was she holding his hand? I'm supposed to be your girlfriend. Kyuubi-chan told me that I should act like it, Naruto explained. That made sense, and he suddenly felt a wave of amiability towards the demon. There was a sudden flare of killer intent directed at him. Now, that didn't make sense. What was pissing the Uchiha off? He and Naruto holding hands? Well, whatever it was, he was fine with pissing him off. Naruto's voice came through his mind. Sorry if the hand-holding makes you uncomfortable. Just try and pretend I'm Ino or someone. He was feeling uncomfortably warm at the act of holding Naruto's hand, but it wasn't unpleasant, and he sure as hell didn't want to pretend she was Ino. That would just be disturbing. It's fine, Naruto. I do have a few more questions about the earring, though. First, why did you give it to me instead of the Uchiha? And can you tell me more about it? It was bugging him, just a little. Why him? The whole experience of talking, and being able to hear her clearly, and knowing that no one else could, was a little odd, too. Well, Naruto said, and he could hear the grin in her voice, a few reasons I guess. You have pierced ears, and Sasuke doesn't, and I thought you would appreciate it more. Oh, Sasuke will think something's up since I can't really stay quiet, but he won't be able to figure it out. It'll annoy him to death. She sounded ludicrously cheerful, and she was right. Sasuke glanced back at the pair, an irritated frown on his face. Shikamaru smiled. It was working already. Over the next few hours, he learned that the chakra thread between the two studs couldn't be disrupted, or at least not easily, by large bursts of chakra. That Naruto had inscribed the seals on the stud with a pin, since she had been bored to tears, and was working on a ramen recipe book, which didn't surprise him at all. The travel to the Yugakure would take 2 full days of walking, if they pushed on all day, and they would arrive at the city walls on the morning of the 3rd day. Now, sun was just beginning to set, and he was tired. They had walked all day, and, even though they had only covered a fraction of the distance they could have using their ninja skills, it was still tiring. He was tired. Naruto's stomach was growling loudly enough to scare off small game, and Sasuke was developing a twitch in his right eye and a permanent scowl from wondering why Naruto was so quiet. A small clearing appeared to the side of them, and Naruto stopped, making Shikamaru stop, too, and making him realize that they were holding hands again. He quickly let go, and shoved his hands in his pockets. Sasuke, come on, I'm tired. Let's stop for the day, Naruto whined. Sasuke stopped and glared at her. We can go a little farther. There's still a bit of daylight left, he said flatly. Shikamaru sat down and leaned against a tree on the side of the clearing. He knew how this was going to end. Naruto crossed her arms under her chest, unknowingly giving her breasts a upward thrust, and pouted. Intelligence or no, Shikamaru knew that he wouldn't be able to refuse whatever Naruto asked if he was Sasuke. No, Teme, we've been walking all day. I'm not a ninja, or have you forgotten? I'm tired and hungry. Now, you can go on by yourself, or you can carry both me and Shika. Look at him. He's already almost asleep already. He's also incredibly lazy. He's probably put in more effort today than he puts in a week. It might fry his big brain. Shikamaru wasn't quite sure that he liked her logic, or how she thought of him, but if it got the Uchiha to stop, it was fine with him. Sasuke glared down at her, looking as if part of his sanity had crumbled. Fine, he growled, stomping off to the clearing. Naruto grinned and gave Shikamaru a huge thumbs up. He smiled lazily, and the two of them watched as Sasuke took out a scroll and summoned 2 sleeping bags and pouches of food. His stomach growled in hunger, but it didn't cloud his mind. 2 sleeping bags? Why were there only 2 of them? There were 3 people, and that called for 3 different sleeping bags. Unless the Uchiha was planning on staying up and keeping watch all night. He wasn't the only one who saw the problem. Hey, Sasuke, what's up? Why are there only 2 bags? Naruto asked, walking up to him. Sasuke looked up from the fire he was starting. You always forget everything, so I brought yours, Dobi. And you brought one for Shika, too? Sasuke shot Shikamaru a dismissive glance. No, I did not. The other one is for me. He can sleep on the ground. After several more minutes of arguing on Naruto's part, and HN's, on Sasuke's, Shikamaru finally stood up. He was flattered that Naruto was sticking up for him, and it was fun watching her yell at the Uchiha, but it wasn't working. Naruto, just give up. I can sleep on the ground. If you stop yelling at him, then he can get on with cooking the food, he said, placing a hand on Naruto's tense shoulder. Naruto shot one last glare at the Uchiha and stuck out her tongue at him. You are the worst ninja protector ever, Sasuke Teme. After a very odd meal, in which even Naruto didn't ask for second helpings, and in which Shikamaru learned that cooking was not one of Sasuke's skills, the sun was gone, and, after taking a look around with his Sharingan, Sasuke had retired to his sleeping bag. The smug bastard. Shikamaru leaned against the tree and closed his eyes. He was used to sleeping, well, practically everywhere he could. So sleeping like this was no problem, even if it was a touch cold and a bit bothersome. Like earlier in the day, he was alerted to Naruto's presence by a soft rustle. The stars still gave off enough light to see faintly. She dragged her sleeping bag next to him under the tree, unzipped it, and hopped in without a word. A few seconds later, she said, "Well, are you getting in?" His brain stopped working and rebooted in 0.06 seconds. Had she just invited him into her sleeping bag? Yes she had. Him, and her, in the same sleeping bag. Unbidden, explicit, each of worthy images began to form in his mind. What are you talking about, Naruto? He asked, happy that he managed to sound normal. Her voice came out of the dark. Even if you're super lazy, you're pretty nice, and you don't deserve to sleep on the hard ground. Anyway, we're both guys. Well, sort of, not really anymore, but never mind, I'm tired, just get in. Shikamaru waffled back and forth over the prospect for a moment, and then slid into the sleeping bag next to her. Thanks, no problem. He laid rigid and unmoving, until he felt Naruto's arm fall over his chest, and her body wriggled against his own before stilling. His eyes widened. Now what was she doing? She wasn't getting fresh with him, was she? Then he realized. Her breathing was deep and even. She was asleep. He relaxed slowly. What had he been thinking? Ah, well. Naruto's warm breath ghosted across his neck. He flushed, and then groaned quietly. He wasn't going to get much sleep tonight. How troublesome. Shikamaru was woken up rather rudely the next morning. What the hell are you doing? A cold voice asked rudely. Shikamaru opened his eyes and blinked blearily, trying to get his surroundings in order. Sasuke was standing over him, arms crossed, and glaring ferociously. Shikamaru glared back, albeit lazily. This was not the most pleasant way to wake up. He didn't answer and instead focused on whatever was pressing down on his shoulder. It was Naruto. She was asleep, head resting on his shoulder, and, sometime during the night, his arm had wrapped around her. She nuzzled against him in her sleep. Now, this wouldn't actually be a bad way to wake up, if the Uchiha had been bugging someone else. Even though he knew that glares couldn't kill, the Uchihas came as close as one could. Finally he answered Sasuke's question. Well, I was sleeping before you woke me up, and now I seem to be laying here, he drawled. You know that's not what I mean, Nara, Sasuke gritted out, clenching his fists. Naruto conveniently chose this time to wake up. She snuggled in closer to Shikamaru, and then frowned, using her hand to pat and feel what she was laying on, as if she was trying to figure it out, and it happened to be Shikamaru. Naruto opened her eyes and blinked sleepily before finding herself nose to nose with Shikamaru. And, instead of the look of shock or yell that he had been expecting, she merely said, "Ah. Morning," in a slightly awkward voice, a faint dusting of pink spreading across her cheeks. Then she sat up and stretched cutely, arching her back and stretching her arms over her head, giving each of the males a rather nice view. After stretching, she looked up at Sasuke. What's up? What's up? What's up? Dobi, why is Shikamaru in your sleeping bag? Duh, Naruto said, as if it was obvious, which it was to her. You wouldn't let Shika have your bag, so I let him in mine. It wasn't fair to let him sleep on the cold, hard ground. The fact that the ground wasn't that bad, being covered by a layer of springy grass, and that it hadn't been that cold either sprang into Shikamaru's mind, but he kept quiet. It was amusing to watch Naruto be completely oblivious to the real source of the Uchiha's annoyance. I don't get why you're freaking out about, Teme. We're both G guys, and when I become Hokage I'll need to be able to take care of the people in my village, so why not start now? Besides, I wouldn't have had to share a sleeping bag if you had given him yours, Naruto said in a completely matter-of-fact voice. Shikamaru hid a grin under a yawn as he got up. Naruto had essentially, but without meaning to, blamed the whole situation on Sasuke. If only Sasuke knew that Naruto wasn't really a guy. Sasuke would probably be trying to stab Shikamaru with a few shuriken and then ram a Chidori through his chest. It was weird. Naruto, now, seemed to be one of the few people that the Uchiha cared about, which meant that he was very protective of Naruto and jealous of anyone who tried to come close. Shikamaru looked at the Uchiha closely as Naruto told him to stop being a Teme and shoved the sleeping bag in his arms. It could be possible that the Uchiha saw Naruto as more than just his best friend, but didn't he think that Naruto was a guy? That would mean that he was. Well, it was possible. As far as he knew, the Uchiha had never shown any interest in the members of his fan club. Shikamaru shuddered slightly. Fangirls were a scary race. Naruto's face appeared in front of him and he switched his train of thought to the present. I'm hungry, and I don't want to die of food poisoning, so that means that Sasuke can't cook breakfast, she said, and the unasked question hung in the air. You want me to cook breakfast? Why don't you? She pouted and groaned. I'm so hungry that I can't function right now. Must have food, please. If her glazed eyes were any indication, she was telling the truth. Shikamaru knew that having the Kyuubi in her made her have an extremely fast metabolism, and she had barely eaten the day before. With a sigh, nodded his head once. Troublesome? Thank you, she yelled, although at half her usual volume, and then proceeded collapse onto the grass and close her eyes. Lazily, he slouched towards the packs of food and fire that the Uchiha had set up. 15 minutes later, Shikamaru raised his head from plates of food he had just set out, and called, "Food's done." In a flash, Naruto was next to him. "Thank you," she said, grabbing a plate and taking a bite. He watched as her face went from a cheerful, if slightly ravenous, smile, to a thoughtful look, to an expression of horror. Shikamaru flushed slightly as Sasuke smirked. Being a genius with the highest IQ in the village did not translate into good cooking skills. Naruto clapped him on the shoulder, and said solemnly, "Thank you for trying." That alone told him how bad the food was. To his surprise, over the next minute, she ate all of the food he cooked and put on her plate, and had a second helping, much to his surprise, and Sasuke's obvious annoyance. For some reason, it felt as though he and the Uchiha were fighting. But over what? He had an idea, but didn't want to think about it. It was too troublesome. A few minutes later, everything was packed up, and they were walking again, Sasuke in front, and Naruto and Shikamaru behind him, walking closely. Using the earring that Naruto had given him the day before, which was actually surprisingly easy, Shikamaru asked, "Naruto, can I ask you something?" Sure. It was something that had been bothering him since they had been in the Hokage's office. When you were interacting with Kakashi. Where did you learn to act like that? Naruto burst out into laughter aloud, and Sasuke glanced back at them suspiciously. Oh, well, about that. Well, while I was learning how to be a ninja when I was a boy, Kyuubi-chan thought that I should learn what a kunoichi should learn, too. How to seduce and flower arranging and stuff like that, for when I finally told people the truth, you know. I learned from her in my mindscape while my body slept. She's actually a good teacher. Her face went blank for a moment, and then she shook her head like a dog, expression annoyed. She's got a huge ego. Shikamaru smiled and nodded. He hadn't exactly expected that. So the Kyuubi taught her? She taught her well. He had gained another interesting fact as well. Naruto could talk to the Kyuubi in her mindscape while she was sleeping. That meant that she could learn and practice anything, as long as it wasn't physical. Naruto's voice, slightly nervous, added, and I may have learned some things from Ero Sennin when I was traveling with him. He made me proofread Icha. I can never get those images out of my head now. I had to help him with his research and write some parts of the books. She shuddered. He stared at her and tried to piece together what he was hearing. Naruto had written part of Icha, which meant that he had read what she had written. It was probably the latest volume. His mind went back over it, and his eyes widened. Naruto had written that? Wow. The next question was whether she had actually done any of what she had written. He tried to squash the steamy images that were swirling around his brain with less than moderate success. That settled it. Intelligence was clearly no match against hormones. What happened next, though, was enough to force it from his thoughts. 4 unknown chakra signatures flared to life as their owners burst from the forest on either side of the path the trio was traveling. They were dressed in standard ninja outfits, black, face masks, also black, with the only odd thing being their shoes. Instead of a regular shinobi sandal, they looked like rubbery boots. He started to slide into a defensive posture, ready to fight, but stopped. Naruto hadn't moved at all, and then he realized why. They were supposed to be civilians. They couldn't fight at all. In fact, they should probably do some cowering. Naruto was doing exactly what the mission asked for, and in doing so, leaving herself wide open to attack. Shikamaru relaxed his stance. This meant that their lives were being protected by the Uchiha. Their lives were in his hands, and Naruto was trusting him. Shikamaru had no choice to do that same. He shot a quick glance at Naruto. Her body posture, arms tucked in, shaking, made her look frightened. But her eyes, while wide, were excited, not scared. Sasuke lunged forward. Kunai grasped tightly in his hand, and moved swiftly, sidestepping one of the ninjas and appearing behind him. The deadly edge of the kunai slid across the unknown ninja's throat, scarlet sprayed into the air, and he collapsed, limp, onto the ground. Shikamaru tensed as he studied the unknown ninja. They didn't wear any headbands, and their movements were surprisingly smooth and quick. Sasuke dodged under the enemy ninja's kick and, with a flip of his wrist, the kunai lodged up to the hilt in his chest. Then, the third ninja changed direction suddenly, leaving his companion to keep Sasuke busy, and raced, footsteps kicking up dust, in Shikamaru and Naruto's direction. Instinctively, Shikamaru moved in Naruto's direction, to protect her, but a single glance from her stopped him. Her eyes were calm. "Don't move," she said through their link. The enemy ninja was right in front of Naruto. Shikamaru could feel fear welling up inside him, fear for Naruto. His heart was thumping loudly in his chest, and the next moment almost happened in slow motion. The ninja brought down the tanto knife in his hand in a smooth arc, blade glinting. Then, the shinobi's eyes bugged out, dimmed, and he toppled forwards at Naruto's feet, a large hole in his back. Sasuke stood over his corpse. But Shikamaru could see droplets of blood splattering onto the ground in front of Naruto, and the blood didn't belong to the attacker. His heart gave a painful lurch. This wasn't just troublesome, it was worrisome. Despite the blood on the ground, she was still standing, which was a good sign, but then he got to the front of her. Her orange shirt was sliced straight down her chest, and a scarlet line stood out shockingly, and horrifyingly, against her tanned skin, blood dripping downwards. "Naruto," he choked out. The wound wasn't just a scratch. The Uchiha was paler than usual and his eyes were wide. Naruto, on the other hand, was frowning. "That hurts," she yelled, dancing from foot to foot. "Shit, ow, ow, ow." Sasuke and Shikamaru exchanged glances. Shikamaru was pretty sure that if you're mortally, or even badly injured, you didn't dance around yelling. He had read something that said that when children were injured, you needed to worry when they were quiet and still. If they were yelling, then they were fine. Using that information as a basis, he decided that, somehow, Naruto was probably okay. Finally, Naruto calmed down and looked down at her wound. Damn it, I really like this shirt. Shikamaru stared at her. That was all that she had to say? There was a 6-inch bloody gash on her upper body. She looked up from her ruined shirt and bloody body to Sasuke. Another second and I might have been really hurt. You're getting lazy, Teme, she said, punching his shoulder, albeit harder than usual. Sasuke managed an HN, but Shikamaru could see that he was a little rattled and worried, and, was that shame? Naruto really did seem to be the only person the Uchiha cared about. Next, Naruto turned to Shikamaru. Give me your vest, she said, gesturing with her hand. That was one of the last things that he expected her to say. What? Your vest? I need it. Look at my shirt. I can't wear this, she said, acting as though she hadn't just been attacked. Shikamaru looked at her shirt. It was being held together by only a thin strip of fabric. A faint gust of wind fluttered the pieces of cloth covering her from being completely nude on the top, and he was tempted to wait for a bigger gust of wind. He shook his head. There was nothing about the situation, well, except for the fact that Naruto was very close to being shirtless. Why his clothing? Sasuke asked. Because, he's closer to my size. Well, at least a little, and you aren't wearing a vest. If I took your shirt, you'd be walking around shirtless, and then we'd be mobbed by fangirls or something. Shikamaru still has a shirt under his vest, Naruto explained. Shikamaru nodded and took off the small vest he had been wearing. Since he was supposed to be a civilian, he didn't have his normal flak jacket, but instead a dark green, thin, vest with a single wooden button. We should bandage your wound first, Naruto, he said, holding the vest back at the last moment. She didn't even spare a glance at it, huh? Oh, right, I suppose. Was it natural to be this unconcerned about wounds? One of you will have to bandage me, Naruto said innocently, having no idea the effect that her words created. The cut started at the dip between her breasts, and if it needed to be bandaged. Sasuke had bandages out before Shikamaru could blink. Emo bastard. Naruto frowned. Now, how am I going to manage this? Shikamaru could see her problem. She had to take off the shirt to let Sasuke bandage her, and she was completely naked under the shirt, so they would see it all. Finally, she slipped her hands under her shirt, hands cupping her breasts, and said, okay. Shika, you bandage me, and, Sasuke, you cut my shirt off the rest of the way, okay? Shikamaru didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the bandages from the Uchiha and waited as Sasuke took his kunai and slit the strip of fabric keeping the mangled shirt around Naruto's neck. It slid off of her and fluttered down to the ground. Now, Naruto was standing before him, dressed only in a pair of low-hanging pants, cupped hands covering part of her full breasts, dipping into a tiny waist, and showing a large amount of unblemished tan skin, besides the giant bloody slice, of course. He made a mental note to thank the Hokage for forcing him on the mission. He could feel the Uchiha glaring daggers at him, and started bandaging Naruto. The cut had already stopped bleeding, which was odd, considering how deep it was. He supposed that it had something to do with the Kyuubi. After all, he knew that Naruto healed far faster than the normal rate. His fingers skimmed over her skin, which was even softer than it looked, and he knew that they lingered slightly longer than was necessary. Only too soon, she was bandaged, and he could only hope that she didn't see the flush staining his cheeks. He could still feel the Uchiha burning holes into his head. Okay, now, both of you turn around so I can bet on the vest, Naruto ordered. The two teenaged boys obeyed. Naruto's hand snaked around Shikamaru and grabbed the vest from his slack hand. Something warm and soft pressed into his back momentarily, and he tried not to think about what they had been. Now was one of the times when he wished he were a Hyuga. If he was, he would have Byakugan, 360-degree vision. That would come in extremely handy right about now, although he was pretty sure that the Hyuga wouldn't condone their bloodline being used for that sort of thing. Naruto's voice interrupted his less than pure thoughts. Okay, you can turn around now. And they did. Naruto was wearing Shikamaru's vest, and he had to admit that it looked better on her, with a deep V-neck and very little fabric. The only thing keeping the vest closed was a single button. Shikamaru never realized how much he disliked buttons until that moment. Then, Naruto brought up something that he should have noticed. "Hey, weren't there 4 ninjas that attacked us?" Naruto asked, pointing at the 3 bodies on the ground. Sasuke nodded, but, oddly, didn't add anything further. "You let the other guy go so that you could save me, didn't you?" Naruto exclaimed, grinning broadly at Sasuke. She got no reply. "Ah, I knew you had a heart, Teme." Shikamaru almost laughed at the cold and annoyed expression on the raven's face, and knelt down next to one of the bodies of the dead shinobis. He ripped off one of their masks and looked into the face of a man who looked a little older than them, with short brown hair and rough features. Then, he patted down the body. There was nothing distinctive about the ninja at all, except for the shoes, which he examined closely. They were lightweight rubber of some sort, closely fitting, with almost duck-shaped soles, and definitely waterproof. They looked like rain boots. Shikamaru straightened up and shoved his hands in his pockets. Rain boots. The Yuga cure was in the land of hot water. Hot water. Water. The specialized shoes would fit, but that would mean that the Yuga cure had ordered their deaths. Why? Or did this actually make sense? The Cage said that he couldn't trust the people in his own government. Either the Cage, or someone from his village, had ordered the attack on them, and it could be for various reasons. If by the enemy and not the Cage, supposing that the enemy wasn't the Cage, it could simply be to see if they were what they claimed, 2 civilians and a ninja. Or, it could be to kill them to keep them from reaching the Yuga cure. Either way, they needed to be alert for more danger. After Sasuke sealed the bodies into a scroll, the 3 continued on their trek to the Yuga cure. Shikamaru continued to think about the situation, while keeping half an eye on Naruto. He was worried about the knucklehead, even if her wounds weren't bleeding through the bandages. Something felt wrong. It didn't make sense how little she cared about the wounds. The day went by without any other attacks on them, and night fell just as easily. They stopped for the night, and the first thing that the Uchiha did was plant himself in front of Shikamaru. "Yes, Uchiha?" he asked lazily, eyelids drooping. Something was shoved into his arms. It was a sleeping bag. "You can use this one," Sasuke said coldly. For some reason, Shikamaru got the feeling that he wasn't offering just to be nice. He tried to hand it back. "Why so nice, Uchiha?" "Thanks, but no thanks. I'm sure the Naruto wouldn't mind sharing with me again," he said. It was fun to irk him. Sasuke clenched his teeth, and Shikamaru could hear them grinding together. "Well, now you won't need to share," he spat, and swirled around and making a beeline to Naruto, who was kneeling by the fire. He sighed. Well, he had a sleeping bag now, and he didn't particularly want it. He could only hope that Sasuke wasn't planning on sharing a sleeping bag with Naruto. Groaning, he plopped down next to Naruto, who was cooking, and closed his eyes. Several minutes later, he was poked awake. "Hey, Shika, if you don't get up, I'm eating your food." He cracked open his eyes to see Naruto holding out a bowl to him, and his stomach gave an unpleasant flop. The food over the past 2 meals had been lacking to say the least. It looked like beef stew, normal beef stew, but he was weary. He tried a spoonful. "It's good," he said. Naruto poked him with a spoon, again, grumbling, "Geez, do you really need to sound so surprised?" He was about to ask where she had learned to cook, but stopped. Of course she knew how to cook. Although he knew that she loved ramen like nothing else in the universe, and probably ate it more than anyone, but a person couldn't live on ramen alone. She had no parents or caretakers growing up. She had been on her own and had had to take care of herself. That included cooking. His mind wandered off to how nice it would be to have Naruto cooking for him. He usually ate out, since it was too troublesome to cook himself. He was snapped back into reality by the offer of second helpings. After the meal was cleaned up, Naruto settled down into her sleeping bag. Sasuke was brooding, hands together, head bowed, but Shikamaru knew that he was paying close attention to the surroundings in case someone was out there. "Good night, Sasuke." "Night, Shika," Naruto said, voice blurred with sleep. "Good night, Naruto," both males responded, and then glared at each other for good measure. Shikamaru lay in his sleeping bag, and stared at the stars, which, although they weren't as calming and informative to look at as clouds, still helped him think. He stayed that way for hours, thinking about the possibilities, until his eyes finally drifted shut. The next morning came quickly. Shikamaru grunted and woke up abruptly as something hard came in contact with his leg. "Wake up, we need to get moving," Sasuke said, and then turned away. "Troublesome ass," Shikamaru muttered, and by the stiffening of Sasuke's back, he was pretty sure the other guy heard him. Slouching, Shikamaru rose up out of his sleeping bag, leaving it for Sasuke to pack away, and stood over the other lump of a sleeping bag on the ground. Apparently, Sasuke hadn't bothered to kick Naruto awake. He squatted down and looked at the mass of fabric. "Hey, Naruto, get up." The lump gave no sign of getting up and only wriggled. He tugged the fabric back and a bleary-eyed Naruto glared at him sleepily. Her hair was spread out behind her, and she was pouting. He tried to focus. It was too early in the morning to think about how she looked. "Do I have to?" she asked. He nodded shortly. Feeing, she yawned and scrambled to her feet. "Okay, we should probably change your bandages and then get going," he said, refusing to acknowledge the thought of Naruto taking over her vest as the main reason for changing her bandages. "Don't bother," Naruto said, lifting up the edge of the vest, and grabbing the end of the bandage and yanking on it. The bandage fell away, and revealed smooth skin. The only trace that anything had been wrong was a faint pink line on her tanned skin that seemed to be vanishing before his eyes. "Yep, all good. I'm ready to go," she said, pumping her fist in the air. Shikamaru shook his head. Thinking about it was just odd. No one should be able to heal that fast. And, even if Shikamaru knew about the demon within her, it still took a little to wrap his mind around it. How did her cells regenerate so quickly? Sasuke packed away the sleeping bag, and, after a quick meal of protein bars, they set off. "We should get there shortly," Sasuke grunted, after they had been walking for a little. The scenery had changed. In and around Konoha, the ground was solid and covered with green grass, the trees tall and leafy. Now, the trees were more gnarled and bent with graceful drooping branches. Moss covered the ground and the bark of some of the trees. Pools of steaming water dotted the landscape. No one spoke. They were all tense. Then, they turned the corner, and came face to face with their final destination. The tall, dark stone walls, with patches of bright green moss, of the Yugakure stood high in front of them. A moat of steaming hot water surrounded it completely. Shikamaru stared at the huge wooden gate in front of them. They had no idea what was on the other side. Shikamaru sighed and shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. There was no doubt about it. This was going to be troublesome. Before they had a chance to do anything, the gate, which closely resembled a drawbridge, came down and two figures stepped out. They were dressed in dark slate blue outfits, pants bound with bandages right below the knee, flak jackets that hooked over one shoulder diagonally, and both of them wore black face masks. Their headbands gleaming with the Yugakure symbol. They looked identical, except for the top portions of their faces and their height. The taller one, with dark hair, slicked back with a single long bang handing forward, bowed. "We have been expecting you, and welcome you to our village. Please follow us," he said, voice polite and courteous. Naruto turned to Sasuke, and smiled at him. "Okay, Sasuke. I'll see you in a few weeks." Shikamaru watched closely. He had been wondering how the Uchiha would react at this point. According to the mission, Sasuke was only there to escort them to the Yugakure, and that was all. For some reason, most likely his high level of IQ, although it could have just been common sense, he had the feeling that the Uchiha wouldn't just want to leave. Sasuke looked down at Naruto, his expression stony. "I will come with you." Naruto rolled her eyes. "No, you won't, Teme. The Hokage said that you were to accompany us here, and then go back, leaving us with the people of the Yugakure completely as a sign of, oh, yeah, good faith." The two Yugakure ninja exchanged confused glances. Maybe they weren't used to civilians arguing with homicidal-looking ninjas. Shikamaru sighed, and said to them, "Don't even try to understand." They hesitated and then nodded, going back to watching Sasuke and Naruto. Sasuke was currently glaring down at Naruto with the famous Uchiha glare. "Well, the Hokage is not always correct in her assessments," Sasuke said. He started to say something else, but Naruto cut him off. "Don't even think about going against the orders of the mission, Teme. Now, be a good ninja, and go back. I can take care of myself," she declared loudly, and with a stubborn expression. Sasuke's eye twitched, and his lips thinned, but he finally looked away from Naruto's bright blue eyes. "Fine. Just take care of yourself, Dobi, he said. Naruto puffed out her cheeks cutely, and then, to everyone's surprise, hugged Sasuke, wrapping her arms around his waist. Sasuke stiffened, and he glared down at the blonde attached to his waist. Shikamaru swore he could see a hint of pink on the other man's cheeks, though. Naruto, get off, he growled. Naruto let go and sheepishly scratched her head. Sorry, I forgot bastards don't like to be hugged, she said cheekily. If you ever hug me again, I will destroy all of the ramen in Konoha, he hissed. Naruto went pale. You bastard. Why don't you just kill me? Shikamaru's sweat dropped at the conversation between the two. This just wasn't normal, although he wondered if anything to do with Naruto was normal. Probably not. Sasuke stalked away from Naruto to the two ninja. If you two allow anything to happen to Naruto, I will use my Mangekyo Sharingan on you, and then, if you're still alive after that, I will disembowel you and set your organs on fire, he said fiercely, flashing his Sharingan, eyes scarlet and black. Then, before they could respond, he turned to Shikamaru, and growled 3 words, don't try anything. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow. He assumed that the Uchiha was talking about Naruto and, frankly, he had never listened to his advice before and didn't intend to start now. He just slouched his shoulders and gave Sasuke a bored, troublesome. Sasuke turned smoothly on his heel and strode smoothly away, towards Konoha. Bye, Teme. I'll see you soon. Naruto yelled after him, waving furiously, even though Sasuke wasn't looking. The Uchiha gave a small half-wave in response, not even looking back. Then, he put on a burst of speed and disappeared, leaving 1 smiling idiot, 1 bored genius, and 2 semi-freaked out shinobi. Naruto turned back to Shikamaru as if nothing disturbing had happened. Are you ready, Shika? He nodded, thinking about what had just happened even if Naruto wasn't. It was obvious that the Uchiha cared about Naruto, even if he didn't want to show it. Shikamaru supposed that it was a good thing. It kept the Uchiha from being a complete cold bastard, just mostly one. Naruto bounded up to the 2 shinobis, her assets bouncing noticeably with each step, and said, I'm really sorry about the Teme. He isn't really a people person, but he didn't need to threaten you. You guys will keep me safe, right? She had her head tilted cutely, and hey eyes wide. The shorter of the 2 ninja, who had bright red, gravity-defying hair that would have almost rivaled Kakashi's, stepped in front of his partner, and grabbed Naruto's hands. I will totally protect you. Every inch of you, he said, making a confused Naruto blush and his partner roll his eyes. Hands off of her, Kazuo. She's got a boyfriend, he said, jerking his head in Shikamaru's direction. Shikamaru stepped forward and wrapped his arm around Naruto's waist, pulling her hands out of Kazuo's, trying to ignore how smooth Naruto's skin was. Kazuo merely glanced at Shikamaru and then to his partner, and then to Naruto, who looked adorably confused and a little flustered. Not for long, Hisoka, not for long, he said with a confident grin and a wink at Naruto. Shikamaru knew what he, Kazuo, was thinking. Usually, the shinobi boys and men were more popular to the female population because of the mystery and, well, aura of coolness that surrounded them, with the exception of Guy. Even if it didn't make sense in the least to Shikamaru, he knew it was true, and, since Kazuo thought that he wasn't a ninja, he thought he had a better chance. There was only one problem with Kazuo's thinking. Shikamaru was a ninja. Naruto wasn't his girlfriend, and there was no way in hell that he was letting a Kakashi in training get close to Naruto. Hisoka just shook his head again and gestured to the entrance of the Yugakure. I apologize for my partner's behavior. Please follow us. Shikamaru steered Naruto past the 2 ninja into the Yugakure. The moment they stepped through the gateway, a tingle ran up Shikamaru's body. He knew what it was. The seal that disillusioned any henge that came past it. The gate rose immediately behind them, shutting with a firm and final slam, and sealing them off from any assistance from their own people. A faint buzzing filled his ears, and then Naruto's voice came over through his earring. Why was Kazuo acting like that? Was he flirting with me? She asked. Shikamaru stumbled slightly, almost falling over. How could Naruto act like how she did with Kakashi and then not understand when a guy was basically telling her he wanted to see her naked and be her boyfriend? She was so innocent. He answered her, yes, Naruto, he was. Before she got a chance to continue, Hisoka said, we will take you straight to the cage and to Kodo, the cage's daughter. Please, ask me if you have any questions in the meantime. Well, that was interesting. He had started to call her Katona. That meant that he probably was closer to her than a normal shinobi would be, and then he had quickly tried to change it. Maybe he wasn't supposed to? Or he didn't want people to know. More things to think about. Okay, thank you. Naruto chirped in response to Hisoka's offer. Ooh, ramen. This is going to be awesome. Shikamaru grabbed her hand before she could run off to the ramen stand. Not now, Naruto, he ordered, and, when Naruto pouted, added, troublesome. I could take you out to eat ramen, if you want, Kazuo said, grinning when Naruto beamed at him. Shikamaru leveled a glare at him, but then shook his head. Kazuo didn't even have any idea what he was offering. Naruto could eat 5 or 10 bowls of ramen easily, and empty a wallet in a matter of minutes. No, he needed to focus, and not on how much he wanted to brain the Yugakure ninja. He took stock of the surroundings. The streets resembled Konoha's, with shops ranging from restaurants to clothes stores to markets to weapons stores. The ground, except for the center of the street, was covered with thick green grass and the air was moist. Men, women, and children looked at them curiously as they passed. Shikamaru couldn't help notice that several of the men were gazing at Naruto with less than completely honest intentions. He groaned inwardly. He could just tell that this trip was going to be bothersome. The street widened, and a large building sat right in front of them. It was large, made out of dark stone like the walls of the Yugakure and what looked like petrified wood. Large glass windows covered the walls. Shikamaru guessed that the light from the windows counteracted the darkness of the place. It was impressive and rather imposing. Naruto and Shikamaru walked, or rather, were herded into the building and through its halls. People stopped what they were doing and looked at them curiously, but here, unlike on the streets, it was more than idle curiosity. The ninja were sizing them up and compiling any facts they could about the two. Hisoka knocked on a large double door, with 2 large bright white hangings with the symbol of the Yugakure, 3 thick, slanted black lines, and Hisoka said, "The 2 civilians from Konoha are here to see you." There was a second of silence, and then a gravely, quite male, voice answered, "Send them in." The doors opened inwards and Naruto and Shikamaru were ushered through yet another doorway. The doors shut quietly behind them. Sitting behind a large desk of petrified wood, worn smooth by hundreds of items rubbing against its surface over time, was a man. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with dark brown hair streaked with gray pulled into a ponytail at the nape of his neck, the beginning of a beard that looked like he had forgotten to shave in a few days, and strong, sharp bone structure. The man, who Shikamaru guessed was the Cage, Takeshi Shimizu, judging by the fact he was the one sitting behind the desk, and even if he didn't look like what most people would expect a leader to look like, looked a bit like a Suma, only with less beard. Takeshi's eyes took in their appearance, and when his eyes met Shikamaru's, he held his gaze steadily through half-closed eyes. Naruto, on the other hand, decided to greet Takeshi in her usual unconventional manner. She stared at him wide-eyed, before exclaiming, "Wow. You look like a bum, but not one of the bad bums. A good one, you know, one of the ones that go around doing odd jobs." "Huh, Ba-chan doesn't really look like a Hokage either. Never mind. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. Nice to meet you." Shikamaru's watched as Takeshi stared at Naruto, before his lips quirked into a smile. "Yes, Tsunade told me about you. Except I am quite sure that she told me you were a boy. You seem to be a girl now," Takeshi said. Naruto gave him a huge thumbs up complete with a grin. "I look good, right?" Naruto had managed not to answer or clarify anything at all. Shikamaru smiled and interrupted before the conversation became any odder or more off-topic. "My name is Shikamaru Nara, and we have been asked by the Hokage to protect your daughter, I suppose." He sighed, and he looked around the room half-heartedly. "Where is she?" He saw the skeptical glance that Takeshi shot him, and he knew what he was thinking. Truly, he didn't look or act like a ninja, but, really, that was bothersome and way too much trouble. Apparently Naruto knew what he was thinking too, and hastened to assure Takeshi, saying, "Shika's a brilliant ninja. He's a genius actually, but he's really lazy." Well, it wasn't quite an assurance, but it felt nice having Naruto say he was a brilliant ninja. Takeshi smiled at them, accepting, and said, sit down. I am glad that you two have come. I trust Tsunade, and so I trust you too, I suppose." He turned his head and called in a loud baritone, "Katona, come in here." A side door opened and a young woman stepped through. She had long dark brown hair, obviously inherited from her father, fair skin, large brown eyes, and wearing a long, sleeveless, pale green dress with a white sash. She was pretty, Shikamaru noticed. She could even be called beautiful, but it was a quiet type of beauty. "This is my daughter," Takeshi said proudly. Katona bowed before smiling at Shikamaru and Naruto. "It's nice to meet you," she said politely. Before anyone could move, a blonde blur shot across the room, and Naruto hugged Katona warmly. "Aw, don't be so formal, Katona-chan. We're supposed to be friends," she said, giggling as Katona blushed bright pink. Takeshi was just staring at the two girls, and Shikamaru sighed. Naruto certainly worked differently than other people. Takeshi shook his head, hiding a smile, and then the smile fell away from his face, and he said, voice serious, "Now that you've met my daughter, I will fill you in on everything that's happened and why I asked Tsunade to send you both here." Shikamaru turned his full attention, or as much as he could, on the cage, trying to ignore Naruto, who was still hugging Katona. It was as distracting as it had been when Naruto had been hugging Hinata. It was getting to be a little bit troublesome. Almost everything Naruto did seemed to be distracting him. Shikamaru shook his head. It was time to focus because, no matter if it was tiresome or troublesome, the mission really started now. Takeshi gestured for Shikamaru to sit down, and he did so gratefully. He wasn't about to say that it was too troublesome to stand up, but he still preferred to sit. He slouched down into one of the chairs, and debated whether Naruto was distracted enough that he could light a cigarette without Naruto ripping it out of his grasp and either throwing it away or incinerating it. She was still hugging Katona, who was still blushing. Naruto dragged Katona down into a chair and sat next to her. Not for the first time, Shikamaru wondered whether Naruto preferred women or men. She kept hugging women, Katona, Hinata, and, even if Naruto said that all she had wanted to be was friends with Sakura, she had been really persistent. Yet, when a guy flirted with her, she had to ask him if he was. Why was he even thinking about it? It had absolutely nothing to do with the mission. Takeshi cleared his throat and started. When I was voted into power of this village, I decided that things needed to change. We had no way of defending ourselves if we needed to, and that left us weak. I wasn't sure what to do yet, but then on one of my trips to talk to other villages, I ran across a family who had a bloodline. They were from Kirigakure, and they had just escaped being slaughtered. It was then that I had the idea. I invited the family to come and live in our village, where they wouldn't be persecuted, and then began to make preparations for my idea. We would become a shinobi village. That way, we could protect ourselves, gather in another source of income for hiring ourselves out for missions, and take in people who had nowhere else to go. It made sense to me, so I started implementing my plans immediately. Gathering more families who need a place to stay, a place where they can be happy and safe, building schools, gathering Rouge ninjas as teachers, not the murderous or insane ones. I started this all 8 years ago, keeping it secret from the other villagers. He paused and then continued. Do not imagine that it was easy, convincing the people, the other members of the council, and old families. Many of them were against it, but I won them over, and those that I didn't win over, I either ignored or had to dismiss. You probably could have guessed all of that, Shikamaru, he said, directing the last comment towards Shikamaru. Shikamaru nodded in reply, fingers sneaking towards the pouch with his cigarettes in it. Naruto seemed to be engrossed in what Takeshi was saying. And now we get to the reason that I asked Tsunade to send you two to me. Katona has almost been killed twice before. Once, 3 months ago, she was almost stabbed through the chest with a kunai when she was on the training grounds. That wouldn't be out of usual, it being a training ground, except that there was only one other person there, and they didn't throw the kunai. Shikamaru held up a hand, not the one with the now burning cigarette, and asked, "And how do you know that for sure?" "Because, I was the other person there. Now, as I was saying, the kunai came out of nowhere, and almost hit her. Then, 8 days ago, it got worse. Katona was almost assassinated in her bed. If it hadn't have been for one of her guards, she would be dead. The first incident might have been an accident, but not that. That's when I decided I needed help, and I had no idea who was behind these attacks, so I didn't know who to trust in my own village. I don't know why anyone would want her dead. I can't think of a thing. besides someone who despises me and wants to make me suffer by taking away what is most precious to me. He shot a fond look at his daughter and lapsed into silence. Shikamaru's brain worked, synapses firing rapidly. That was one option, but there were more, many more. If it wasn't for something that Katona had done consciously, then it might have been something that she saw or heard but didn't realize the value of it, or she was needed out of the way for some other reason. Or, if it wasn't about her, then it could be for revenge, as Takeshi had indicated, or something else entirely. There were so many options, but not enough facts. He needed more. He took a puff on his cigarette, and asked, "How does the system work here? Are the leaders of the council always chosen, or does lineage have anything to do with it?" Takeshi looked a little startled at the question, but answered readily, "Well, in the past, before we became a ninja village, the ruler of the council was passed down the line of a specific family, and, in the case that no one was left in the family who would take the position, then a new head of council is chosen. That is how I came into power. In the event that I die, Katona will take over." Shikamaru nodded. That made sense. If he died, Katona took over, and if she died. "Do you have any other family members, Takeshi?" Shikamaru asked. Usually, he would be a little more respectful, even if it was troublesome, but Takeshi didn't seem like the sort of person who wanted to be treated differently. The older man shook his head. "No, it's just me and Katona. Her mother died a few years ago." Following that train of thought, then after she died, his family would be out of power, and someone else would need to be chosen. It wasn't that difficult to have two people killed, and someone had probably figured that Katona would be the easier one to take out. And her death would probably weaken his physical health, not to mention mental health, making him easier to kill. But why now? And was it to gain the position, or was it simply something only to do with Katona? He moved to take a puff of his cigarette, only to place his lips around nothing. He looked up and sighed. Naruto had stopped hugging Katona, and was now standing over him, his cigarette in her hand, glaring down at him. "What did I tell you? Smoking is bad. Ramen is good. Smoking makes you not taste the ramen. You're a genius, Shika. It's not that difficult. No more smoking." She threw the offending item out the open window, and then turned back to him. "You'll try to stop smoking, right?" she asked, scooting into the chair with him and pressing up against him unconsciously. "Please?" Naruto pouted. He felt his cheeks heating up, and coughed into his hand to hide his embarrassment. Unfortunately, Naruto took his cough another way. "See, the smoke is already affecting your lungs," she exclaimed, hugging him as if he was going to keel over any moment. Over Naruto's shoulder, Shikamaru could see Katona and Takeshi exchanging glances, confused glances. Great, they were probably getting the wrong idea. "Naruto, you are a guy, right?" Takeshi asked pointedly. Katona jumped and stared at Naruto. "What? You're a guy?" Naruto stopped hugging Shikamaru, leaving him to keep telling himself that he did not miss the feeling of her body against his. Naruto plastered a smile on her face and declared, "Yup. I'm a guy. Great henge, right?" Shikamaru frowned inwardly. He wasn't an idiot, and he'd spent enough time watching Naruto to recognize one of her fake smiles, which she actually had on her face a lot. It was a little odd, but he didn't want other people to know that she was really a girl. It felt nice being the only one who knew her secret, and there would be untold numbers of guys in Konoha after her if they found out. And, if they found out, he would make sure that they all had unfortunate accidents that kept them in bed, unable to walk, perhaps unconscious, for a few weeks, or more. Shikamaru shook himself back to reality just in time to see Takeshi say, "Okay. Tsunade did say that you were a boy. So are you too?" He pointed back and forth between Shikamaru and Naruto. "Okay, so now they were getting mistaken for a couple." Shikamaru refrained from answering, instead closing his eyes and wondering whether they were in some odd genjutsu, and Naruto just tilted her head to the side looking clueless. After an awkward silence, Takeshi cleared his throat and said, "Never mind. Katona will take you to where you will be sleeping, okay? And then I'm sure that she can show you around the village. I would do it myself, but I have work that needs to be done. Be safe." Shikamaru heard the pled in the words. "Keep my daughter safe, and try to pretend that nothing is wrong. I don't want to worry my people." Katona rose gracefully from her chair, still shooting glances at Naruto and Shikamaru and Naruto followed her, Shikamaru bowing his head lazily to Takeshi, and Naruto energetically waving goodbye. Shikamaru closed the door behind him, and after Katona and Naruto. Hisoka and Kazuo were still waiting for them outside the door. Takeshi bowed when he saw Katona, and Shikamaru couldn't help notice that Katona was blushing, and, if he guessed right, Hisoka was blushing, too. His bow was just covering it. "Hello, Hisoka," she replied, twiddling her fingers in an almost Hinata-like gesture. Naruto's eyes lit up as she glanced from Hisoka to Katona. It completely and utterly figured. Naruto understood other people's feelings, as long as they didn't have anything to do with her. It was like she had a mental block. It didn't seem like it was on purpose, she was just dense when it came to herself apparently. When Katona finished fiddling her fingers, she cleared her throat and turned to Naruto and Shikamaru. "Shikamaru, Naruto, would you two like to see our Shinobi Academy? It's what I'm especially proud of, but I'd like to show you the rest of the town as well," she said. Naruto hugged Katona, saying, "Ah, Katona-chan, I know we haven't seen each other in a while, but you don't need to be so formal. I told you that already." Shikamaru read in between the lines. "You're not acting right. At this rate, everyone is going to know that something is wrong." Seemingly, Katona understood what Naruto was saying as well. "Sorry, Naru-chan. Naru-chan? That was cute. Maybe he could call Naruto that." Katona hesitated and then said, "I think you should change your clothes, Naru-chan, and then I'll show you around." Naruto blinked at her. "Why?" "Well, your shirt. It's not covering, I mean, the amount of material." "Oh, I just think it would be better if you change." Katona sputtered. The vest did seem to be straining the single button that kept it shut. Shikamaru silently cheered for the button to pop and then stopped. When had he become such a pervert? Kazuo chose this time to speak up. With a lascivious wink at Naruto, he said, "I think she looks perfect." Katona rolled her eyes at her, and growled, "You would." Kazuo narrowly dodged a cuff aimed for his head by Hisoka. Shikamaru shook his head slowly. "Really troublesome. Would it be alright if you went and bought some appropriate clothing for Naruto, and then met us at the academy, Miss Takeshi?" Hisoka offered formally. A flash of dejection flashed across her face at what he called her, but was replaced by a polite smile before she quickly turned to Naruto. "That's a good idea. Are you okay with that, Naru-chan?" Naruto nodded. "Do I need to? I like this vest. It's Shika's, but, fine. I'll see you in a little, Shika," she said. He nodded. "Sure, just don't take too long and make me come to look for you." "That would be too much work," he answered lazily. She beamed at him. "Okay, let's go." The three boys watched as Naruto and Katona walked off, when Shikamaru had a sudden thought. "Naruto, don't even think about getting any ramen," he yelled after her, and heard a groan in response. Then, it was just him, Hisoka, who he didn't mind much, and Kazuo, who he would like to maim, very, very much. "So," Kazuo said, once the girls were out of sight, breaking the silence, "why was Naruto wearing your vest? I wonder how she'd look wearing my shirt, just my shirt." Shikamaru changed his mind. He didn't just want to maim Kazuo, he wanted to tie Kazuo up, skin him very slowly with a blunt kunai, use him as target practice for shuriken, and then make him watch hours of Rock Lee and Might Guy hugging, complete with the sunset in the background. That amount of torture, green spandex, bowl cuts, huge eyebrows, and pain, both emotional and physical, would be enough to make anyone go insane, or die from blood loss, whichever came first. He must have been emitting killer intent, although he was smart enough, and aware enough, to keep it in the range that a civilian could muster, because Hisoka suddenly looked as though he realized that it wasn't a good idea to have Shikamaru and Kazuo together. Shikamaru glanced at the clock on the wall. He could only hope that Naruto came back before he cracked and killed Kazuo, which wasn't sounding too bothersome at this point. After all, he was a genius, so he could kill him and not leave a trace of what had happened behind, right? He glanced at the clock again. When was Naruto coming back? Hisoka cleared his throat nervously. "Well, let's start walking to the academy, shall we?" Shikamaru shrugged, "Sure," and started walking forward. He noticed that Hisoka purposely stepped in between Shikamaru and Kazuo, probably with good reason, like keeping a homicide from occurring. As they walked the streets, Hisoka acted as a shinobi tour guide, pointing out shops and landmarks. He reminded Shikamaru a little of Iruka, just less motherly, and Kazuo was like Kakashi. He shuddered inwardly. There really didn't need to be more Kakashis in the world. Not that there was anything wrong with the man. It was just astounding the level of perverseness that he attained. Kazuo interrupted Hisoka's description of the history of one of the statues. So, Naruto's your girlfriend, right? Shikamaru eyed him. Yes. Where was the lecherous bastard going with this? Huh, it just seems a little odd. You guys don't really act like it. Is the relationship going badly? Kazuo asked in a deliberately casual voice. Shikamaru twitched and tried to keep an apathetic expression on his face instead of the murderous scowl that would be more appropriate for his emotions. Well, maybe the reason that they didn't act like boyfriend and girlfriend were because they weren't, not that he could tell Kazuo that. He wouldn't mind having Naruto as a girlfriend, but he tried to clear his thoughts. That was not the right thing to think about on a mission. In reply, he leveled a bored glare at Kazuo and said, "No, it's not going badly at all. We're happy together. Although, back off before I disembowel you," was what he really wanted to say. Really? Because that's not what it looks like, Kazuo said, whistling. Shikamaru's hand twitched towards where he usually kept his kunai and shuriken, only to realize that they weren't there. The air got tense, and then Hisoka exclaimed loudly, "Oh! Look, there's the academy. We're here already, and the girls should be here soon." A person couldn't look more relieved than he did at that point. He probably was ecstatic that they had gotten to the school without blood being shed. Shikamaru left off glaring at Kazuo, who had been glaring back, and looked around. The academy, unlike most of the other buildings, was light, whitewashed stone and made out of heavy blocks. The building had an odd grace about its L-shaped wings, but it also looked solid, and like it could survive the wear and tear of several jutsus gone wrong. As they was almost everywhere in the town. A thick green lawn was in front of the building, but around the corner of the building, behind it, there was the bare, brown, almost reddish, earth that he associated with training grounds. The multiple-floored building loomed over them, but it was actually welcoming and cheerful. Now, the three were standing in front of the building in silence that quickly became awkward. Kazuo broke it. "So, about Naru." Hisoka punched his friend in the shoulder, sending him slamming into the wall with a satisfying cracking sound and accompanied by a small cloud of dust. Hisoka laughed nervously. "I'm sorry about him. He's a horndog and an idiot. He really isn't a bad person, though," he said as Kazuo groaned in the background. Shikamaru smiled, more at the fact Kazuo had gotten pummeled than at the fact that Hisoka was apologizing, but said lazily, "I got it. I know a person like him." Hisoka looked pained at the mention there might be another person like Kazuo, but said, "Hopefully, the girls won't take too long. There's a lot of the academy to show you, and I'm sure that you will want to get settled in before nightfall." Almost as if they had sensed his words, two pairs of footsteps sounded. Shikamaru turned to greet them, and then everything that he had planned to say flew completely out of his head. Naruto was, wow. It was amazing how that puny three-lettered word was the only word that described how Naruto looked. "So, Shikamaru, how do you think Naru-chan looks?" Katona asked, smiling. Shikamaru looked at the subject of the conversation, eyes trailing over her form. Against all odds, Katona had managed to get Naruto into a dress. It went just past her knees, slid up the side so that she could move easily, and clung to her body. It had a high neck and no sleeves, but a pair of dark blue arm warmers that hooked over her thumbs accompanied the outfit. The dress fit her almost like a second skin, showing off all of her curves, and, of course, it was orange. A smile flitted over Shikamaru's face. Of course the dress was orange. There was little probability that Naruto would agree to wear something that wasn't orange, but this was, she looked, wow. There was that word again. Then, he realized that he still hadn't answered Katona's question. He cleared his throat hurriedly and said, "She looks wonderful." Katona nodded. "She does, right? You have no idea how hard it was to get her into a dress, though. The only way I got her into this one was because it was orange." Naruto pouted. "Dresses are impractical. Pants are so much better, but orange is awesome. What do you think, Shika?" she asked, twirling around to show off the dress. The skirt flared upwards, showing more tan skin. He swallowed. "I think you look beautiful." The words were out before he could stop them. Naruto's eyes widened, and she flushed. Katona giggled and nudged Naruto in the side, only making her blush worse. Kazuo, of course, butted and then. He stepped forward, apparently over getting smashed into the wall, and kissed Naruto's hand. "You look gorgeous, Naru-chan." By now, Naruto looked positively confused and her face was the color of a tomato. Katona and Hisako were watching from the sidelines, and almost looked as if they were amused. Shikamaru grabbed Naruto's other and pulled her towards him and away from Kazuo. He draped a possessive arm over her shoulders and drew her closer to him, close enough that she squeaked, and, to Shikamaru's surprise, didn't pull away. Either she still remembered that they were supposed to be playing girlfriend and boyfriend, or she actually didn't mind the close contact when he initiated it. He found himself hoping for the second option. He lowered his arm from being draped across her shoulders to snaking it around her waist and glanced at Katona and Hisako. This seemed to snap them out of whatever stupor they were in. "Right, we'll start the tour now," they said in unison, guiding Naruto and Shikamaru through the entrance of the academy, ignoring the shouts of Kazuo about being, well, ignored. The inside of the building was all painted walls and wooden floors and paintings. Kazuo fell into step on Naruto's other side, much to Shikamaru's displeasure, and he could see Kazuo eyeballing Naruto. He just had to calm down. There were too many people around to kill him. He'd wait until later. Katona and Hisako's voices blended together as they took turns explaining about the building and everything else to do with it. They really did seem to complement each other well. "We have clans, mostly from Kirigakure, that send their children here to learn how to be shinobi, but the children of civilians attend as well. They start training when they're 4, although it's more like babysitting or a playgroup at the beginning, and then, when they turn 10, they are given the option of continuing their training or quitting and either doing whatever they wanted, or become apprenticed to other professionals in the village or take over the family business. Then, the ones who have chosen to continue their training for 2 years. Then, they take an exam to become genin. If they succeed, they are put on teams of 3 with an instructor, and if they fail, they train for another year if they wish, and if they fail the next time, they lose their chance to become a shinobi and we either help them find a job to do with shinobi or protecting the village, or they choose to do something else. The ones who did pass the exam study under their senseis until they become chunin and then they operate in their teams for missions or go their separate ways." Shikamaru nodded as they explained, paying attention with most of his mind, although a corner of his mind couldn't help but notice that Kazuo was watching Naruto's hips switch back and forth as they walked with a huge perverted grin on his face. Shikamaru was surprised that Kazuo didn't a nosebleed yet, and was tempted to punch him in the nose to give him one. Really, when did he turn into such a possessive, violent pervert? The answer? Since he had found out that Naruto was a girl. He really hoped that this behavior wasn't a trend. At this rate he'd have to lock Naruto in a tower to be satisfied that she was safe from the unsavory approaches of the male. His lips quirked into a smile. He wouldn't mind locking Naruto in a tower, alone, with only him. He really needed help. Did they have clinics to cure people of perversion? Back to the way that the Yugakure's system worked. It was a lot like Konoha's system, except that they started training earlier, and the options available weren't quite the same. And Konoha let the kids try 3 times instead of 2. It actually sounded like the Yugakure had their shit together, maybe more than Konoha. The way that Katona and Hisoka explained it, it made it sound like they really tried and cared. Shikamaru glanced at Naruto. He knew only too well that in Konoha kids could be ignored and be pushed to the side. Of course, the academy here probably wasn't perfect either. Katona stopped outside a sliding door. "One of the classes is in session, but I'm sure that the teacher won't mind us visiting." She slid open the door and ushered them inside. The room was shaped like a partial amphitheater, with steps leading down from the doorway, where a teacher stood behind a desk and in front of a blackboard. The setup looked so familiar that Shikamaru wondered whether it was a copy of their own classrooms. The faces of curious students peered at them from every direction. The teacher span around and smiled when she saw who it was. She had violet-colored hair, pulled up into a loose bun, apricot-colored eyes, and pale skin. "Lady Katona, Hisoka, Kazuo, nice to see you again. And I see you brought guests?" Katona nodded. "Yes, this is one of my friends from Konoha, Naruto, and her boyfriend, Shikamaru. I thought they might be interested in our academy." The woman smiled at them. "Oh, well, it's nice to meet you too. My name is Anzu, and this is my class." One of the students piped up. "Yeah, we're going to become genin in a week." The one who had spoken was a boy with short, spiky black hair and baggy dark green clothing that seemed to have an unlimited number of pockets. Anzu sighed. "Yukio, sit back down." The boy chose to ignore her advice and, instead, hopped over his desk and stood in front of Shikamaru and Naruto. His gaze wandered over them both before settling on Naruto, or, more specifically, on her chest. Wow, your boobs are bigger than Anzu-sensei's. The room lapsed into absolute silence while everyone stared at the boy, Yukio. Then one of the largest amount of killer intent the Shikamaru had ever witnessed welled up in the room, almost making it hard to breathe. More than a dozen girls, the female students in the room, had stood up and ominous waves were coming off of them, and they all happened to be glaring at Yukio. "You are so dead," another boy whispered, and then he saluted, "It was a pleasure to know you." Anzu looked like she would want nothing more than to sink into the floor or give the boy endless detention. Shikamaru glanced at Naruto, who had yet to say anything, even though she was the one being objectified. She was just staring down at the boy, eyes wide. Everyone was waiting to see how she responded. Then, she grinned. "Yeah, they are kind of big, aren't they?" she asked proudly, groping her own breasts. Kazuo got an instant nosebleed. Hisako turned away, and Shikamaru got the distinct impression that he had a nosebleed, and Katona yelled, "Naruto," in an outraged voice. Shikamaru quickly wiped away a trickle of blood and stared at Naruto. That was definitely not the right reaction. She should be embarrassed at the very least and murderous at the most. Of course, her attitude towards the whole thing might have something to do with actually being a boy a few years ago. She had actually been a pubescent boy, so it made sense, in a completely twisted way, that she would understand Yukio's interest in large breasts. Because she had been, or maybe still was? The whole situation was weird, but he didn't really expect anything otherwise with Naruto. Yukio was still staring up at Naruto, and seemed flabbergasted, like he had been expecting to be clobbered. Then, a slow grin formed on Yukio's face, and he exclaimed, "You're awesome. Anzu and Katona would have walloped me if I'd said that to them. Same with the rest of the girls, and they're all flat compared to you." He jerked a thumb over his shoulder where said girls were sharpening kunai. He paused for a second and then added, "Well, except for Ran-chan." A girl with extremely pale hair, tanned skin, and a definite bust line, squeaked and crossed her arms over her chest. Yukio smoothed his bangs back from his face and wriggled his eyebrows, sidling up to Naruto. "So, Katona said that he's your boyfriend, but is it serious, or do I have a chance?" Shikamaru exhaled sharply through his nose. "Really? First Kazuo and now this 12-year-old, they were both after Naruto. Even if the kid was, well, just a kid, it was still annoying." So, Shikamaru did what he thought was the right thing to do if he was acting like a jealous boyfriend, not that he was one, of course. He whacked the kid over the head, just like Naruto should have. "I'm her boyfriend, and she doesn't need another one. Try again when you've got a few more inches on you," Shikamaru said lazily, like the kid wasn't worth his time, which only served to infuriate the raven-haired boy. Yukio narrowed his eyes and glared up at the Nara. The look he was giving him would have made even Sasuke give him props or at least an HN for its intensity. "I am not short," he yelled, eye-twitching. Naruto moved away from Shikamaru and frowned at him. "Yeah, he's not short." Shikamaru groaned inwardly. Was he really a genius? He should have known better. Of course Naruto would be touchy about the shortness topic. After all, when she had been younger and he had been short. That sentence was just too confusing. He held up his hands in defeat. Okay, he's not short. How troublesome." He stuck his hands in his pockets and slouched. Naruto turned to Yukio and said, "Sorry, but Shika's my boyfriend." Shikamaru's heart skipped a beat. Even if it wasn't real, hearing Naruto say that affected him. Naruto continued, "You are so cute, though." She hugged him, unconsciously pressing his head onto her breasts. Yukio, now renamed, the little bastard, in Shikamaru's mind, turned his head and smirked at him. It wasn't worth blowing his cover as a civilian to use any number of painful and humiliating jutsu on the boy. He just needed to keep repeating that. Once Naruto let go, Anzu finally blew up. "Yukio Nakamura, how dare you act like this? You are well on your way to becoming a genin of this. You want to dishonor us all? You need to think about your behavior and how it reflects on others before you act. Lady Katona, perhaps it would be better if you visited another day." Would that be acceptable? She was holding Yukio by the back of his shirt with one arm in the air. Katona nodded, still seemingly shocked by what had witnessed, and Hisoka nudged her towards the door. Kazuo walked up to Yukio and grinned at him. Good job, man, you make me proud. Why was it not surprising that Kazuo was corrupting the youth? Yukio beamed up at the older boy, and they bumped fists. Then, Kazuo winked at Anzu. Hey, are you busy after class? We could go out for some dango, or we could skip the food altogether, he asked suggestively. Anzu's face turned a rather flattering shade of pink, and she scowled at Kazuo. No, I would not like to get something to eat with you. I am 5 years older than you, and you're a bad influence on the children. She snapped. Kazuo was still grinning, his mood apparently not dampened by her refusal. Instead, he disappeared and then reappeared behind her, giving her butt a pat before fleeing the room while she screamed some very creative death threats after him. Naruto seemed to be overcome with giggles, and Shikamaru took her by the hand and hauled her out of the room. The last thing that he heard from within the room was Anzu saying, "Now, I think we should head outside for some sparring." Who wants to have Yukio as a sparring partner? We do, the girls chorused, murderous intent lacing their furious voices. Yukio whimpered, and then the door slid shut. Shikamaru couldn't help but feel a little sorry for Yukio. He was in for a world of pain by angry females. Maybe the system that they used wasn't quite perfect, but everything had little issues, didn't it? And the academy seemed to have perverted students and angry females as an issue. It almost reminded him of Konoha. He turned to Naruto, who was still giggling. Did we learn anything from that? He asked. They were supposed to be learning vital information about who would want to hurt Katona and about the newly formed shinobi village. Nothing useful, she said, fighting to keep a straight face. He nodded without energy. That was true enough. Dinner will be in an hour. How about we head back to my house? I'm sorry about the class. It's not usually like that, really, Katona said apologetically. I can show you the rest of the academy and town tomorrow. Naruto's stomach chose that moment to growl loudly. That's fine. It would be too much work to see the rest of this place now anyways. Naruto agreed with him, clutching her stomach and pouting. I think my stomach is eating my stomach. I need to eat before it moves on to my other organs. I need them. Shikamaru snorted at the ridiculousness of the statement before narrowing his eyes as Kazuo popped up next to Naruto. Hey, Katona, do I get invited to eat at your house tonight? He asked. She lifted her chin and gave him a very annoyed, and somehow regal, look. No, it was simple, and exactly what Shikamaru wanted to hear. Hisoka backed her up. Kazuo, don't even think about it. I knew it wasn't a good idea to let you near the students, and Anzu is going to write a complaint to the council about your behavior, again. Besides, we were supposed to be stationed at the walls today, and Jin took our spot. Go join him. Kazuo let out a long-suffering sigh and grabbed Naruto's hand, declaring dramatically, sadly, I've been sent away, but I'll see you tomorrow, my sweet Naru-chan. In the meantime, I'll be wishing that I was in your company. Then he kissed a surprised Naruto on the cheek before shining and disappearing in a small burst of water and steam. Okay, that settled it. He was going to seriously hurt Kazuo next time he saw him. He grabbed Naruto's hand and hauled her towards the exit of the academy. Let's go and get something to eat. Naruto let out a whoop and ran past him, now dragging him after her. Food. And, just like that, she seemed to have completely forgotten that Kazuo had just kissed her on the cheek. Apparently, food ranked much higher than Kazuo. He couldn't help wonder if he rated above food, and what sort of reaction Naruto would have if he kissed her. He sighed, letting Naruto drag him along. Maybe with Kazuo gone he could actually learn something important and focus on finding out who wanted Katona dead instead of worrying about Naruto getting molested. His fingers twitched for his cigarettes, and he sighed again. This really was the most troublesome mission that he'd ever been on, and it wasn't even halfway over. Troublesome? After Hisoka had caught up to them, since Naruto had run off in the wrong direction, and Katona led them in the right direction, they arrived at her house. It wasn't quite what Shikamaru had been expecting, although he wasn't quite sure what he had been expecting. It was an apartment building. The outside was painted a light green, and, of course, moss was growing on the wooden boards. The 4-story building looked as if it had been there for years. The council wanted father to move to another place when he became head of the council, but he refused, and we kept living here. We needed a place to entertain and discuss matters with visiting dignitaries, though. The apartment was too small for that, so we expanded. The entire top floor is our house now, Katona explained as Hisoka pushed open the oddly wide and peeling paint door that led into the building. The lobby wasn't anything special either, just a normal apartment lobby like you could see in any village. A guard behind the counter bowed as they passed. 3 flights of stairs later, they arrived at the 4th floor landing. Numbered apartments lined the either side of the corridor, and Katona, after digging out a key, ushered them into apartment 40. The inside of the apartment was completely and utterly different than the outside. First impressions showed smooth bamboo floors, clean, simple artwork on the walls, comfortable furniture in earth tones, and blue walls. As they walked further, with Shikamaru making a mental map of the place in his head, he knew what they had done. All of the walls separating the apartments had been torn down or had doors cut into them. It was a little odd, but so was finding out that the Yugakure had become a ninja village all of a sudden, Naruto being a female, and even Takeshi didn't seem right to lead a village. He wasn't stuffy and stiff enough. Voices filtered through yet another doorway. One was easily recognizable as Takeshi's, but the other 2 were not. One was even deeper and slightly raspy, and the other crisp and polite. Both were male. Beyond a sliding door, 3 men sat at a table. One, at the head of the table, was Takeshi, but the other 2 were unknown. On Takeshi's left, was an older man, with a wild-looking mane of hair that made Shikamaru wonder whether he got his hair cut at the same place as Jiraiya. His face was heavily lined with wrinkles, and a deep, puckered scar wound its way from his temple down the side of his face to his chin, distorting the aged skin. A silver-capped cane sat at his side. The man on his left side was far younger than either of the other 2. His light brown hair was neatly cut, and a pair of thin, rectangular lens glasses perched on his nose, obscuring part of his intelligent and pleasant face. His green eyes flickered up from the table to them, and he smiled in welcome. Shikamaru looked back at him, studying the 2 new men from half-lidded eyes. The older one was someone of importance, probably from the council. It was all there with the way he carried himself, and looked down at them. He also had seen a lot of action, judging from the scar and the look about the man. Still, there was something off about him, something that Shikamaru couldn't place. He filed it away in the back of his mind to ponder later and moved his attention to the younger man. Young, either a secretary or someone in training for a higher position, some sort of aide. He was a few years older than Katona, Naruto, Hisoka, and himself. Smart, too. His sharp eyes were constantly watching. Maybe the guy had ninja training? Takeshi beckoned them forward, and they took their places at the table. Katona sat on her father's right-hand side, with Asako next to her, then Shikamaru, and then Naruto sitting in between him and the unknown young man. Katona, it's about time you got back. I was getting worried. Did you show you friends the village? Takeshi asked, looking relieved at the sight of her happy and unharmed. She nodded, yes. Kazuo and Hisoka showed Shikamaru around while I showed Naru-chan around and got her some new clothes, and then we showed them around the academy. Unfortunately, when we got to the classroom, Yukio sort of acted out and, got to know Naruto. And then Kazuo started harassing Anzu, and we decided that we should leave and show Naru-chan and Shikamaru around another day when things weren't quite so disturbing. Takeshi laughed. Yukio's at it again? I hope that Anzu is going easy on him. He does need to be reined in a little, but I hope she doesn't punish him too much. After all, he is one of our prodigies. It's amazing what the boy can do with seals. Shikamaru's head shot up. Lady Tsunade had said that the Yugakure had someone who was brilliant with seals, and it was that brat. He's a prodigy? He asked aloud. Hisoka nodded, yes. He might not act like it, but he's one of the most talented people I've ever seen when it comes to seals. He keeps creating new ones, too. Katona interrupted, her voice prim. I don't think that Kazuo is exactly a positive influence on him, though. There was an understatement. Kazuo didn't have the capability to be a positive influence on anyone, unless they wanted to be an irritating, womanizing pervert. Of course, that was just Shikamaru's opinion, but his judgment wasn't that clouded, was it? It was still amazing to think about. Yukio was the one who had created the seal that dispelled henges, which meant that he was the reason that Shikamaru knew that Naruto was a girl. If he hadn't created the seal, then Lady Tsunade wouldn't have sent him to get Naruto, and he wouldn't have found out that he was actually a she. So maybe he was a little grateful to the boy? Only a little. A door slid open behind them and a woman came in carrying a plate filled with food. She had steel gray hair, pulled back into a tight at the back of her neck, and a weather-beaten face. She was wearing a yukata, gray-blue in color, and, if Hisoka was standing next to her, she would probably only come up to his chest. Another person followed her out. It was the exact same woman, then another, and then another. Either they were all identical quadruplets, or she was a shinobi using shadow clone jutsu. The second option sounded a lot more feasible. Soon, the table was laden down with dishes of food, and Shikamaru was surprised that the table wasn't groaning under the weight of it. The woman retreated to the kitchen, not having said a word the whole time. Shikamaru glanced sideways at Naruto and wasn't surprised by her expression. It was one of absolute rapture. The table was loaded with miso soup, rice, grilled fish, ramen, yakisoba, yakitori, gyoza, sushi, and more. Shikamaru knew what Naruto was staring at. Ramen, she squealed happily. Takeshi nodded. Yes, Katsutashi is particularly fond of it. Oh, I haven't introduced you all yet. This, he said, gesturing at the older man who hadn't said anything, just simply observed is council member Ozuru Watabe, and this is his aide, Katsutashi Yushiba. Naruto, out of the blue, hugged Katsutashi. A fellow ramen lover. What's your favorite flavor? Miso, the poor, startled, and blushing Katsutashi stuttered, caught off guard. That's great. My favorite is miso pork, she beamed. Naruto was the only person Shikamaru knew who could be so enthusiastic about ramen. By now, she had let go of Katsutashi. He pushed his glasses back into place and offered a smile. So, may I ask your names? My name's Naruto. And this is Shikamaru. Her boyfriend, Shikamaru added, slinging an arm lazily around her shoulders. He was just staying in character. Yeah, that was it. What village are you two from? The elder, battle axe of a man, Ozuru asked abruptly. We're civilians from Konoha. Naruto is an old friend of Katona, and we're here for her birthday. Ozuru stared, or glared, it was hard to tell, and then, humphed, and turned away to talk to Takeshi. Naruto frowned after him and mumbled something that sounded suspiciously like, grumpy old codger, under her breath, but then she seemed to remember about the ramen and cheered up immediately. After a short conversation with Shikamaru, Katsutashi seemed to monopolize Naruto and Katona. That left Hisako to talk to Shikamaru, and Hisoka was happy to talk. Shikamaru learned a lot about the village, such as the ratio of civilians to shinobi, which was stunningly high at 8-1, their plans for the future, how he had grown up with Katona, and several other interesting facts. But, after a little, Katsutashi was enveloped into Takeshi and Ozuru's conversation, and Naruto, Shikamaru, Hisoka, and Katona formed their own conversation. Shikamaru kept an eye and an ear on Takeshi's conversation. They were talking about upcoming Chunin exams, which were still a little less than a year away, and whether or not they should allow them to be held in the Yugakure. He paid special attention to the two new men at the table. He just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, especially about Ozuru. Before he knew it, Ozuru and Katsutashi had stood up and were getting ready to go, and Naruto had eaten 6 bowls of ramen, much to Katona's amazement. Ozuru walked out without saying anything, but Katsutashi hanged back for a minute. It was a pleasure to meet you, Shikamaru. Naruto, he said, eyes lingering on Naruto. Inwardly, Shikamaru was cursing. Was every man they met going to flirt with Naruto? Nice to meet you too, Katsu-kun, Naruto said, smiling. He looked surprised at the nickname, but smiled back. Then he was gone. Takeshi stretched his back, popping joints, and rubbed his eyes tiredly. I have some paperwork to go through before I go to sleep, but you guys should head off to bed. I'm sure you're tired after your journey here, and I'm also sure that Katona will want to show you around even more tomorrow, so you should get some rest. Plus, if I'm not mistaken, you have guard duty tomorrow, Hisoka. Shikamaru nodded at him, finding it too troublesome to actually give a verbal answer. Hisoka's eyes widened. I forgot. I need to file some reports, too. He rushed off. Shikamaru could only guess to his room. Katona kissed her father goodnight on his scruffy cheek. Good night, Takeshi, Naruto said, and then turned to Katona. Hey, I'm bunking with you, right? Katona started to agree, but then stopped and stared at Naruto. What? No, of course you aren't. She lowered her voice to a hissing whisper. "You're a boy. Even if you look like a girl. You can't sleep in my room." Shikamaru leaned against the doorway, watching. He already knew what was going to happen. Takeshi placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Naruto will be sleeping in your room. I'm sorry if you don't like it, but it's for your own safety." He placed a whiskery kiss on her head and then quickly shuffled off before Katona could raise any other complaints. Naruto grabbed Katona into a one-armed hug, and said, "Don't worry about it. I look like a girl, right? And right now, I'm pretty sure I'm thinking like a girl. I already think about you as a sister, so you don't have to worry about any perverted stuff. Got it?" She looked and sounded so much like a girl, that Katona even seemed persuaded. Of course, she really was a girl, not that Katona knew that. "Okay, Naru-chan, come on, I'll show you our room." "Shikamaru, are you coming?" He gave a grunt in reply and followed them through 2 more rooms and down another hallways. "This is your room. Naruto and I will be right next door, and Hisoka sleeps in the room on the other side," she said, pointing, and then disappeared into the room next to it, Naruto following her. Shikamaru stumbled into the room and briefly studied it. There was a chest of drawers, a bed, a mirror hanging on the wall, a painting of a waterfall, and a small table with a shogi board on it. Thank Kami. It must have been fate. Now all he needed was someone to play with. Then, he collapsed on the bed. He hadn't realized how tired he was until Takeshi mentioned it. He hadn't even done that much. Maybe fretting about all of the guys hitting on Naruto was tiring. Not that he was fretting. At all. Denial was so comforting, even to a genius. His eyes closed and felt himself drifting off to sleep. He was brought back from the edge of unconsciousness by the fluttering whisper of fabric and the mattress dipping as someone sat down. He cracked his eyes open blearily, and then they shot open of their own accord. Naruto was sitting on his temporary bed, golden hair let down and cascading over her shoulders, wearing a nightgown. A baby blue nightgown made of some almost sheer fabric that ended above her knees and tied with a bow under her bust. It was also quite low cut. Some faraway part of his brain realized that the nightgown probably belonged to Katona, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was that Naruto was in his room, dressed like that, and he was no longer sleepy, not at all. Naruto? Maybe this was a dream? He wouldn't especially mind. "Hey, Shika." She asked something after that, but he didn't answer. Maybe he was asleep after all. He slowly reached out and fingered the material of her dress. He could feel it, soft and silky between his fingers. "Shika?" Naruto asked, looking at him weirdly. Suddenly, he realized that he wasn't dreaming and he also hadn't answered Naruto, instead opting to stare at her with glazed eyes. He cleared his throat. "What? Sorry, what did you say? I asked if you're alright. You were pretty quiet at dinner." He nodded quickly. "Yeah, I'm fine. I was just thinking, did something seem wrong about Katsutashi and Ozuru to you?" Naruto nodded. "Yeah, something about Ozuru. I don't know quite what it is, though." They lapsed into silence, which was broken when Naruto said, "I don't know, you've seemed a little grumpy all day. Whatever it is, you can tell me." How could he tell her that it was because guys kept leering at her? "It's nothing," he said firmly. She probably hadn't even noticed. She gave him a disbelieving look, and then did something he didn't expect. She curled up on the bed next to him and hugged him, wrapping an arm around his torso, and rested her head on his shoulder. "Well, if you ever feel like telling me, I'm here," she mumbled, and he could feel her lips moving against his shoulder. The position they were in was strangely intimate, not that he minded. "Troublesome," he answered with a smile. His body was vibrating, and his skin felt like it was burning everywhere her body came in contact with his. Shifting slightly, he propped himself up and gazed down at Naruto, or more precisely, her full, pink, and soft-looking lips. Slowly, he leaned closer. And then jerked backwards as a voice called from the next room, "Naru-chan? Come on, let's go to bed." "Coming, Katona." Naruto called back, rolling off of the bed. "Night, Shika. See you tomorrow," she said, and then vanished into the night, or at least out into the hallway, leaving a very frustrated Shikamaru glaring at the ceiling. He'd finally summoned enough energy and courage to do something, and absolutely nothing had come from it, because nothing had happened. And now, instead of being sleepy and content, he was wide awake, frustrated, and his body, especially a particular part of his body, was not listening to him. "So damn troublesome," he groaned, trying not to think about what might have happened if Katona hadn't called. Groaning again, he cursed. He had no idea where the bathroom was, so he couldn't take a cold shower. Sleep was not going to come easily.